There is something deeply unsettling about an old house at night. What is beautiful, if a bit worse for wear during the day, can take on a sinister cast once the sun goes down. The moan of the wind outside, the creak of the floorboards, the scraping of a branch against a window. Maybe one of these sounds jolts you awake in the dead of night, eyes opening to a room full of shadows turned twisted and eerie in the darkness. Of course, it's probably nothing supernatural, just an old house settling mixed with your own paranoia. But sometimes, every so often, it is something more. Sometimes you're not as alone in an old house as you think you are. That's certainly the case if you ever find yourself staying in SCP-2696, also known as the Haunted Victorian Mansion of Dark Peak. In 1869, wealthy and renowned industrialist and scholar of the occult Henry Percival Rosyth built a stately home, known as Rosyth Hall, to house him, his wife Clara, and any children they might have in the future. It was constructed to provide Henry with ample space to conduct his arcane research, Clara with a beautiful sitting room and a flower garden to tend, and their future children with lots of space to play and run around as they grew. After an uneventful year in the house, Clara gave birth to 2 baby boys, named Edgar and Miles. For a time, the family was happy there. Unfortunately, this happiness was to be short-lived, as the grim specter of death soon began to loom over Rosyth Hall. In January of 1873, Clara was overcome with a sudden fever and died in her bed. This loss pushed the already eccentric Henry over the edge, and he began making strange changes to the house's interior structure. He added hallways that led to dead ends, strangely angled floors, and twisting corners, turning a once comfortable and lived-in home into something unrecognizable. In August of that same year, Henry's children Edgar and Miles also suddenly passed away, leaving Henry alone at his estate as he continued his descent into madness. He kept modifying the house, expanding from the mansion's library and tower to the rest of the building's rooms. Henry's days were spent supervising the construction around the house, refusing to let the workers carry on without his strict oversight, worried that otherwise his vision would be corrupted. His nights were spent sleepless as he worked away in the tower and in the nursery on the 2nd floor. No one was permitted to witness his work during the night, but his household staff complained of strange sounds, flashing lights, and strange whispers. Many were so unsettled by these sounds and Mr. Rosyth's erratic behavior that they quit their jobs without notice. A wise choice given the circumstances. As his staff dwindled, so too did Henry Rosyth's already fragile grip on reality. His requests for materials became more and more imposing. He demanded 200 kilograms of ground stone from Isle of Anglesey in Wales, and 37 meters of pipes made from an amalgam of mercury and copper, among other unconventional materials. But Rosyth still had money to burn, and no family to spend it on anymore, so his every strange request was accommodated, for a time anyway. In June of 1876, exhausted and unsettled by the long hours of work, the ever-increasingly strange projects, and the unusual supernatural phenomena around the house, the remainder of Rosyth's workers quit. He then fired all of his household staff, with the exception of his loyal housekeeper, and resumed his work in solitude. Though the specifics of just what Mr. Rosyth was trying to achieve would likely have gone to the grave with him, some of his diary entries were recovered from the house, and they provide a peek into his motives and nature of the mansion's anomalous activity. After the death of his wife and children, he became obsessed with the concept of the mind-made body. The notion that having a memory so strong that, if given the proper energetic conditions, it could take on corporeal form. His theory was, if a memory is engraved permanently in the mind, it could then take on a permanent physical and energetic manifestation. He began to experiment with this concept, determined to bring back a form of his wife and children by any means necessary, a noble pursuit that paved the way for madness. It is during this process that he began to remodel the house in order to provide the ideal energetic conditions for his memories to be made material. Eventually, his notes devolved into nonsense, and the pages were covered with geometric equations and blood. His final entry reads, "The children still speak in her voice. I fear I might be going mad." It is true that he might have been losing his grip on sanity towards the end of his experiments, but his work undeniably filled the house with something. It was not long before reports of strange sights and sounds around the Rosyth home reached the ears of those trained to investigate such matters. The house and its anomalous nature were initially discovered by Jitinder Jaishankar, an occultist and investigator employed by the Royal Foundation for the Secure Containment of the Paranormal, or RFSCP. He wrote the first official report on the house in 1876, after investigating multiple rumors of ghostly sightings around the house. He and his team, a married pair of ghost hunters named the Bartons, arrived at the Rosyth home with a sense of apprehension. They were ushered through the door by a housekeeper, who made the eerie promise that Henry Rosyth would be with them shortly. When the master of the house came to greet them, the investigative team was shocked by his appearance. He was gaunt, almost skeletal, with a dark, deep-set eyes bleary from entirely too long without sleep. He looked as if he had aged 100 years in the few years since his wife's death. The team stayed the night in the house, experiencing a restless and nightmare-addled sleep until 2:30 a.m., when the investigative work was to begin. They descended down to the main hall of the house, where a large black door was all that stood between them and the unknown. It opened with a bone-deep groan, as if to warn them not to enter, but still they stepped inside. Once they crossed the threshold, they were greeted with odd angles, a garish array of colors and materials, and bewilderingly high ceilings. All to Mr. Rosyth's very demanding specifications, of course. He spared no expense in making his nonsensical nightmare house an unsettling reality. The Bartons presented dowsing rods, which they used to measure spiritual activity in the room. At first, nothing happened, but soon the dowsing rods began to spark viciously, and a sudden gust of wind blew out all the candles in the room. There was nothing but darkness, and a sudden sense of a heavy presence among them. The Bartons dropped to the floor, with Mrs. Barton leaking blood from her mouth and Dr. Barton convulsing violently. The presence grew stronger, and though it did not speak, it was unmistakable who it was. It was the deceased Clara Rosyth. Jaishankar fled the manor, dragging his unconscious companions out as fast as he could. Once safely away from the mansion, he immediately contacted the RFSCP, well, as quickly as one can when communicating by telegram. A second team was sent to investigate the house in the following days, but when they arrived, Henry Rosyth could not be found. There was no sign of a struggle, no body. He simply vanished. He was never seen again. The SCP Foundation has an official record of two separate incorporeal entities that dwell within the walls of SCP-2696. The first, SCP-2696-1, appears to be the ghost or memory, energetic signature, whatever you wish to call it, of Clara Rosyth. The apparition is the one that Jitinder Jaishankar and the Bartons encountered. She is translucent and intangible, and most frequently appears in the form of Clara as a young mother at the pinnacle of her good health. She has also occasionally taken on several inhuman forms, including a wilting plumeria bush and a disturbing column of bone, muscle, and flesh. Exposure to the Clara entity has a pronounced negative effect on anyone who comes near her. People that come within several feet of SCP-2696 have reported mild visual and auditory hallucinations, such as creeping shadows and whispering voices chanting in foreign languages. There have also been reports of amnesia, fainting, seizures, bleeding from the nose, mouth, and ears, and in the most severe cases, dissociative episodes that result in complete losses of identity. Many of these physical side effects are thought to be the result of the massive amounts of radiation that have been measured being given off by the entity. The second entity in the house, known as SCP-2696-2, is actually two entities that always seem to come as a pair. Known as 2A and 2B, these are the skeletons of Miles and Edgar Rosyth, the deceased children of Clara and Henry. They are located inside of the nursery, which is inaccessible to outsiders, with a door that seems able to seal itself shut at will and keep researchers out. The two skeletons are largely inactive, remaining on the floor of the nursery in the fetal position at nearly all times. They only become active during periods of extreme activity from the Clara entity. When Clara is especially active and attempting to leave her usual domain in the house's tower, the skeletons have been reported to wrestle and play with each other, dance around the room, or stand at the door to the nursery, appearing to be waiting for something. One notable occasion, though, on June 12, 1990, Both instances of SCP-2696-2 were able to actually leave the nursery and travel elsewhere in the house. A series of massive lightning strikes raised the energy levels in the house, and Clara's radiation levels suddenly spiked significantly. Surge protectors placed in the house failed, and Clara became more active than usual, transforming into a swirling dark mass that emitted an ear-splitting shriek. The front door of the mansion slammed itself shut and refused to open, trapping the research team who were present at the time. They were only able to exit after SCP-2696-2A and 2B were spotted leaving the nursery. Hand in hand, they approached Clara and opened their arms to her. Pacified, perhaps by some distant echo of a mother's love, the entity quieted, and the Foundation team was finally able to leave. It is still unknown how 2A and 2B were able to leave the nursery, but there have not been any incidences of this level since. Currently, the Dark Peak Mansion remains standing, and is largely untouched from how its creator left it. The SCP Foundation maintains a strict perimeter of 1 square kilometer around the house, and no civilians are permitted to cross it. Not only is the building restricted for civilians, most SCP personnel are also forbidden from entering the house. Some of the only ones who are allowed inside are a special class of SCP Foundation personnel, Experimental Containment Research Group, or ECRG, and MTF Theta 77, nicknamed Who You Gonna Call. Given what was learned in the 1990 activation event, it is apparent that the containment procedures have a rate of failure that does not adequately contain SCP-2696-1, and according to the containment file, there is a 47% chance of Clara breaching containment completely by 2030. Catherine Stedman once wrote, "Houses aren't haunted, people are." Henry Rosyth was so haunted by the loss of his beloved wife and children that he could not stand to live in his big, empty house all alone. Henry Rosyth may be long gone, but his attempts to grasp at that which was long gone before him have forever changed the house he built. His grief, his pain, his energy filled the house with echoes of his loved ones, and as pain often does when left untreated, it began to fester and turn foul. Dr. Henry Rosyth was a deeply haunted man, and now his haunted house is all that remains of him. It was late October of 1993, and John Matthews of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina had just scored a date with Sarah, one of the most popular girls in school, and he had planned the perfect night out for the two of them. A haunted house had just been set up in town, and he, like many guys before him, figured he could use that as a chance to impress his date. He'd already been through the attraction, so he knew exactly when to put his arm around Sarah when one of the costume actors or animatronics tried to spook them. If any of them got too close for comfort, he might even punch them, just to show Sarah how brave he was. That would be a surefire way to impress any girl. However, John had no idea of the real horror that waited for him and his date through the doors of this seemingly normal funhouse. At first, the haunted house went as normal. John laughed at all the fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons, making sure Sarah knew how dumb he thought they looked. He shoved away actors dressed as axe murderers and told them to stay away from his date. It was dark, so they couldn't really see each other's faces, but John guessed that Sarah was probably really impressed. All in all, the date was going well, until they got to a room that John hadn't seen the first time he'd been through. It seemed like it had been added overnight, but at the same time it didn't mesh with the theme. The theme of the haunted house this year was Cannibal Hotel, but this room looked more like Dracula's castle, complete with actors dressed as Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Dracula himself. One of them was even a dead ringer for the actor Vincent Price. John and Sarah watched, confused, as the actors performed their routines which, just like their surroundings, seemed out of place. It was total hackneyed, full of lame puns and very basic scares, though the special effects were undeniably impressive. When John and Sarah walked through the room, the actor dressed as Dracula stood in front of John and started pretending to hypnotize him. Up close, he did look a lot like Bela Lugosi, the actor who'd portrayed the Count during his first big screen appearance. This definitely threw John off a little, but unfortunately, this Dracula didn't have Lugosi's acting talents. "You are under my control," Dracula said, waving his fingers at John and staring at him. John, getting really sick of this, pushed the guy out of the way to move on to the next room. But when he did, he felt that something was really wrong here. He practically dragged Sarah away from watching the Wolfman transform and ran the rest of the way through the house, all of his bravado now gone. Sarah asked her date what was wrong, and he didn't tell her. How could he without sounding crazy? When he had touched that actor playing Dracula, something hadn't felt right. Even through his suit and cape, John had been able to tell that something was wrong. He was cold and rigid, not like a human being, but like a robot or a wax dummy. This is just one of multiple complaints from Halloween attractions around the United States that prompted the action of the SCP Foundation. Several witnesses described either seeing people that resembled classic movie monsters or living wax models of those monsters appearing in various haunted houses, corn mazes, carnivals, and strip malls across the country. The Foundation has designated this troupe of hammy wax actors SCP-4153. During performances, SCP-4153 use wax to alter their appearance, produce props, including fake blood and gore, and even manipulate wax objects from afar. While this results in some uncanny special effects, the content of the performances tend to be pretty standard classic haunted house fare. They mostly do things like reenacting scenes from classic horror films and telling spooky jokes, with a little fake blood here and there. When the Foundation arrived at the Myrtle Beach attraction, they apprehended the various wax characters and determined that their eerie resemblance to the classic horror characters wasn't just makeup. After the horror some of these Foundation employees had seen on the job, living wax models of Frankenstein's monster and Dracula seemed almost cute in comparison, and the troupe of wax actors were taken to Site 9 for questioning and containment. The first member of the troupe to be interviewed on site was Dracula, dubbed SCP-4153-017 by the Foundation. He was interviewed by Agent Timothy West, who was totally unimpressed with Dracula's shtick. He tried to hypnotize Agent West, an act which he flatly refused to indulge in. Dracula provided the agent with seemingly no useful information, only responding to questions with cliches like, "We were all dead the whole time," and "The log was coming from inside the house." The next wax figure to be interrogated was Frankenstein's monster, aka SCP-4153-015, who was interviewed by Agent Samantha Henwick. Much like how SCP-4153-017 stayed fully in character as Dracula during his interview, SCP-4153-015 seemed to really believe that he was actor Boris Karloff, who played Frankenstein's monster in the 1930s. The SCP spoke in an exact imitation of Karloff's voice and speech patterns, and talked to Agent Henwick as if she was another actor on a movie set. He talked about how honored he was to be part of the project, and asked, "Are we rolling?" when he noticed the conversation was being recorded. Agent Henwick responded to the SCP's comments with confusion, a fact which he took to mean that she was staying in character. Like a true actor, he took a moment to prepare himself before pulling his own head off, much to the horror of Agent Henwick. The last and probably most interesting of the interviews conducted in 1993 was with the wax figure who resembled Vincent Price. More specifically, Vincent Price in his role as Henry Jared in 1953's House of Wax, a movie about a mad sculptor who made wax figures out of the corpses of his victims. This wax figure was designated SCP-4153-036 and was interviewed by Agent Gerald Penn. Penn started the interview with a simple question: "Why do you try to frighten people?" SCP-4153-036 had an equally simple answer: "Why does anyone try to frighten? It's fun to be frightened, almost as much fun as it is to do the frightening." Penn was skeptical, pointing out that the wax figure's act wasn't especially frightening. The SCP laughed dismissively, telling Penn to have some respect for the classics. Penn was still not having any of it. He had been with the SCP Foundation for 20 years at this point, and he'd seen enough real horror that the so-called classics had no effect on him whatsoever. He pressured Price for answers, but instead of responding with a straight answer, Price launched into a speech about his feelings on monsters. He said, "You'll call any oaf with a steak knife hunting gaggles of teens a monster these days. There's no wit, no humor, no charm. Where's the passion, the artisanship? Where's the sense of theater? Would you like to know something peculiar? I've almost never played a monster.
Oh, I've played villains, most certainly, but not monsters. Only men besieged by fate, driven to revenge. Still, I've always had a fondness for them. Even as a child, I sympathized more with the monster than the hero.
Agent Penn, who, at this point, was really getting tired of all the theatrics, started to interject. But when he opened his mouth to speak, he was only able to get a few words out before his tongue went numb and rigid in his mouth. He could no longer move it. Agent Penn tried to speak, but his tongue was too solid and heavy to do anything more than knock uselessly against his bottom teeth. He felt something dislodge inside his mouth, and he hoped maybe it was the feeling of his tongue being freed from whatever spell the SCP had put it under. But then he started to feel a tearing and a sticky heaviness in his bottom jaw. Agent Penn reached up and felt around inside his mouth. He started to scream indistinctly when he realized to his horror that his tongue had ripped off. He pulled it out of his mouth, and when he held it in his hand, his fears were confirmed. Somehow it had become nothing more than a lump of pink wax. Now completely tongueless, Agent Penn continued to babble frantically, no doubt trying to curse at the wax creature sitting in front of him. SCP-4153-036 finally paid attention to his interviewer's distress at this point. He turned to Agent Penn with a look of disapproval and disappointment and said, "Oh dear, your tongue seems to have gotten away from you there. Here, allow me." The SCP leaned towards Agent Penn, and though the agent wanted to resist, he found that he could no longer move his arms. In fact, his whole body had gone numb and rigid, just like the wax tongue. The only movement he was capable of was opening his mouth, and the wax facsimile of Vincent Price started molding his tongue back to the proper shape, and reattached it inside Agent Penn's mouth. Agent Penn whimpered, unable to do anything while the SCP's hands were in his mouth. The creature said, "Hush now, I warned you about this. I told you that you mustn't disturb the wax before it hardens. That is a crucial part of the process. It needs to solidify. Otherwise, you risk disturbing the performance." By the time his tongue was reattached and resealed, Agent Penn was on the verge of tears. He gurgled, gasping for air, wiggling his tongue around in his mouth to make sure that it worked. The SCP returned to his seat, pleased with his own handiwork. "Splendid, splendid, good as new. Now, let's take it from the top, shall we?" Agent Penn took a deep breath, steadying himself as SCP-4153-036 whispered the word, "Action." Penn resumed the interview with the same simple question. Why do you try to frighten people? SCP-4153-036 gave the same simple answer. Why does anyone try to frighten? It's fun to be frightened. Almost as much fun as it is to do the frightening. The interview continued for only a few minutes longer, with both parties repeating only things they'd said earlier in the recording. The log ends with SCP-4153-036 once again saying, "Have some respect for the classics." Not long after the interview concluded, Foundation management completely lost contact with Site-9. A mobile task force was sent in to investigate the cause of this loss of contact, and on arrival, they found a catastrophic containment breach. Not a single member of on-site personnel was found alive, and strangely, all of their bodies seemed to be coated in wax. Further examination revealed that this initial observation wasn't the case at all. They weren't just coated in wax. No, every member of the Site-9 team had all of their major organs, including their skin, surgically extracted and replaced with sculpted wax. Of course, this was assumed to be the doing of SCP-4153, but oddly, all of the autopsies suggested that the removal of organs had happened weeks before the apprehension of SCP-4153, even though all of the on-site personnel had seemed alive and well right up until the containment breach. Outside of being replaced by wax, no damage was done to the bodies. It seemed that everyone had just dropped dead at the same time. There was one body that was different though, that of Agent Gerald Penn. Agent Penn's decapitated body was found in the same containment cell that had been used for SCP-4153-036. Next to the body was a photograph showing SCP-4153-036 holding up Agent Penn's screaming head, and on the back, a single sentence was written. "From one horror aficionado to another, always stay ahead." All of the SCP-4153 instances remain unaccounted for, and MTF Iota-10, also known as the Damn Feds,
Continue to monitor for new sightings and reports of activity that may be linked to the Wax Troop. Hopefully one day, they'll be taken into Foundation custody and contained, and maybe all it will take is for them to meet someone with a sufficient appreciation for the classics.
An archaeologist enters the temple chamber. It's clear that whatever is inside, the people who kept it did not want it found. But there are no chests full of gold and jewels or ancient artifacts piled in the corners. In fact, the room is completely empty, except for one small statue on a pedestal. Upon closer investigation, it is made of green soapstone and appears to be carved into the shape of a seated skeletal figure. It seems harmless, and the archaeologist stares at it until he hears one of his colleagues talking outside. He turns back to answer them before looking back at the statue, which is no longer on its pedestal. The archaeologist panics and calls for someone else to come check this out, but he only manages to get a few words out about the statue's mysterious absence before he starts feeling an odd tightness in his chest. He tries to head for the door, but everything starts going dark. He collapses to the floor, dying instantly. And just as quickly, the mysterious green statue reappears, this time located directly on the chest of the deceased scientist, awaiting its next viewer. SCP-689, also known as the Haunter in the Dark, was first discovered in the early 20th century, as German explorers searched Indian architectural sites for valuable artifacts. The green soapstone statue, only 30 centimeters in height, isn't particularly light, but it's also not large or heavy enough to cause any problems for those looking to take it. Those who have studied it believe that the skeletal figure, which is seated with its hands clasped over its knees, represents an ancient deity of the underworld. After its discovery, the statue's location was briefly unknown, but it was later obtained by the United States Office of Strategic Services from German hands after the end of the Second World War. And that's when its dangerous properties became clear for the first time. While SCP-689 appears to be a standard inert statue, this only holds true if it is being watched by at least one person. When it becomes dangerous is if it is in the presence of a person who watches it, then takes their eyes off the statue. Thankfully, SCP-689's anomalous effects aren't triggered by normal behavior like blinking, but as soon as eye contact is fully broken, like when someone looks away from it completely, the statue will vanish. It will then reappear 15 to 20 seconds later and bring with it a deadly curse. Because each time SCP-689 vanishes, it takes a life. In under 20 seconds, one person who has previously seen SCP-689 and broke eye contact with it will die spontaneously. The cause of death is always some sort of natural cause, but ranges from mundane causes like heart attacks and strokes to sudden ruptures of internal organs, including in some cases, every major organ in the body rupturing at once. If only one person has currently viewed SCP-689 and is alive, the statue will cause their death and immediately appear atop their body. But when there is more than one possible target, the statue becomes far more dangerous. This effect only works on humans, but anyone who has ever viewed the statue is vulnerable. It's as if it keeps a list of everyone who has ever seen it and broken eye contact. And when it has that chance, it starts picking people off that list. And it doesn't matter where in the world they are located. The statue has been shown to be able to teleport long distances and appear on the body of someone who might have viewed it years ago. There seems to be no way to predict in what order the statue will claim its victim. However, a disturbing pattern of who the Haunter in the Dark decides is next has emerged. When the statue has choices available to it, it seems to often target a victim who is in a large crowd. That means that in an instant, hundreds of people could see the statue and become future targets. As if every time an eye is taken off the statue, it could teleport and claim another life. This raises the possibility of a horrific chain effect scenario, where the statue could teleport endlessly and rack up a massive body count in mere minutes. Which is why the Foundation has become determined that it never be seen again. The cell holding SCP-689 is one of the most secure in the entire SCP Foundation, because unlike other Keter-class objects, it gives very little warning. If it is seen, it can be gone in a second with no way of knowing where it is. And depending on how many possible targets are out there, it could be anywhere in the world. That is why it is currently encased in a large concrete chamber surrounded by high-intensity sodium iodide lights. Each of these lights has a separate power supply, so there is no chance of total power failure. And for those tasked with keeping it safe, it's one of the hardest jobs in the Foundation. 3 people are on duty at SCP-689's cell at all times. 2 D-Class personnel are stationed inside the chamber, and a Level 2 agent is stationed in the control chamber. The D-Class agents have one job: to never take their eyes off the statue. They can alternate breaks, but the statue must never be allowed to be unobserved for even a second. And because each person who has seen the statue is a security risk, the D-Class agents are equipped with instant kill devices so they can be terminated from afar rather than being potential targets. The Level 2 agent, meanwhile, has a very difficult job. This is one of the most specialized tasks in the entire Foundation, because the agent must be either blind or equipped with a helmet that completely blocks their vision, which they must wear for their entire SCP-689 shift. All control features in the chamber are designed to be operated by someone without the ability to see, and the operator is not to remove their helmet under any circumstances, or they risk termination themselves as a potential security risk and escape vector. But don't worry, even if the statue still manages to escape its chamber, the Foundation has a plan. Just don't tell staff assigned to 689 what it is. In the event of a containment breach or failure of the lights in the statue's chamber, the first priority is to terminate any D-Class or Level 1 observers who may have been exposed to the Haunter in the dark. This is to reduce potential targets, and while higher-level staff will be retained in most cases, this only goes for the first containment failure. The Foundation will then deploy a retrieval team of blind agents or those wearing vision-blocking headsets. Equipped with echolocation tech, they'll partner with D-Class observers to track down everyone who is known to have viewed the statue. The statue will invariably appear and lead to the death of one of these people, so knowledge of these potential targets is key to containment. Then comes the challenge of returning it to containment. As soon as the statue is located, a perimeter is established with coverings put up to avoid any outside viewers catching a glimpse of it. The D-Class observers enter the perimeter and are transported back to the facility together to ensure it never falls out of sight until it is safely back in its chamber and its containment protocols are put back in place. But what is actually known about this deadly statue? Because of how dangerous and fast-moving the statue is, any attempts to study its properties must be approved by the presiding scientist and are carefully scrutinized. The curiosity to figure out its mysteries is always tempered by the fact that any scientist interested may be subject to summary termination should it breach containment again. Its origins are unknown, but it is thought to be at least several centuries old, and its form is believed to be based on a god of the underworld. This would explain its one function, ensuring people make a swift visit to the afterlife. It does not seem to have any direct hostility towards humans or SCP personnel, and has not given any indication that it is sapient or intelligent, but it does seem to want to spread as quickly as possible, and it may be able to sense where its best targets with the greatest potential to spread are located. This has led many to compare it to one of the SCP Foundation's most notorious residents. SCP-173 is another statue that poses a grave danger to anyone who looks at it the right way. Similar to SCP-689, it is frozen in place and requires anyone who enters its containment unit to look directly at it. Any breaking of eye contact can be deadly, and it's more strict in its definition of breaking eye contact than 689 is. Simply taking your eyes off for even a second, even to blink, is enough to seal your fate. But SCP-173 doesn't use supernatural powers to claim its victim. This large concrete statue instead becomes mobile and extremely violent when eye contact is broken, killing its targets by strangulation or breaking the neck. While this entity has killed many personnel since its containment, it doesn't seem to have the same ability of SCP-689 to teleport to a completely different location, which means it is actually less of a threat than the Haunter in the dark. But the two statues' similar MO of killing when eye contact is broken has led some to speculate a connection, despite one being of modern construction and the other being old, possibly even ancient. But one of these statues poses a potential end-of-the-world scenario, which is why the Foundation is so concerned about SCP-689 breaching containment. SCP-689 might just be among the hardest anomalies to get back in the bottle once it escapes. If it appears far outside containment, in a crowded scene, it now has hundreds of new potential targets. By the time the Foundation tracks it down to its past location, it will have likely teleported again, and there seems to be no limit to how many lives it can claim in a set time. That means that as it racks up more targets and teleports into crowds, it could escalate into a major threat to Earth's entire population. With SCP-689 seeming to be able to kill anything that breaks eye contact with it, there are some in the Foundation who wonder if it should be used against the most notorious captive of the SCP Foundation, SCP-682. This rage-filled, indestructible, regenerating beast has been a thorn in the Foundation's side for years. It has cost countless lives of agents and personnel with its many containment breaches, and so far the Foundation has been unable to terminate it by any conventional means. But SCP-689 isn't exactly what you would call conventional means. It simply triggers an invariably fatal reaction within the body of whoever it targets, which means it could possibly be the only thing that could kill SCP-682 permanently. The risks of pitting these two anomalies against each other are immense though. Not only does any interaction with SCP-682 carry risks of yet another catastrophic containment breach, but moving the volatile SCP-689 puts everyone, not just those in the Foundation, at risk too. The proposed plan involves exposing the two, then immediately turning off the lights. But for this experiment to be pulled off safely, every personnel who has seen SCP-689 must either be terminated or placed in the same containment chamber, giving the statue no choice but to eventually choose SCP-682. To improve the chance of success, the doctors planning this operation have suggested terminating all D-Class personnel in advance to better the odds. Should this experiment ever be approved though, a failure could be truly catastrophic. SCP-682 has already shown itself to be able to come back from things that are seemingly impossible to survive, including having the majority of its body destroyed with only atoms remaining, and yet it was still able to regenerate back. Who's to say it couldn't survive a heart attack or organ rupture too? There is also the risk of 682 gaining the power used against it. The only thing worse than SCP-682 is an SCP-682 that can now teleport around the world to kill anyone who has ever looked at it. But even with these risks, the experiment has not been officially ruled out. Could one of the Foundation's deadliest Keter-class anomalies be the solution to another? It's under advisement, but for right now, the Foundation is keeping a very close eye on SCP-689 in more ways than one. It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation has a storied history with ancient, anomalous groups of interest. From the metal-worshipping Mechanites, to the fire-loving Brazen Heart, to even the brutal empire of the slave-owning Deva, who swear allegiance to the dreaded Scarlet King. But perhaps the most dangerous and downright disgusting of these groups are the flesh-worshipping, disease-loving, body-warping Sarkists. The Sarkists believe in returning humanity to a nightmarish primordial state. They utilize anomalies to achieve this goal, such as the horrible SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates, a disease that converts human beings into mindless beasts of twisted flesh, driven to spread their disease further and further. The Sarkists were once a world superpower, controlling much of modern-day Russia and Eastern Europe from the holy capital of Aditum, a city ahead of its time, with towering blood-red temples, wide, winding roads, and the castle of Grand Karcist Ion, an immense blistering red and gold structure that was as beautiful as it was imposing. It would only make sense that the former area of the Sarkic Empire would host some of the most ghastly of the Sarkic anomalies. It should not be forgotten that while the Sarkists are a group of interest for the SCP Foundation, they are first and foremost a religion, one with ancient practices of blood and human sacrifice. While the SCP Foundation is famed for its containment procedures, when it comes to the likes of actual deity entities, containment isn't quite as straightforward. The standard put it in a box until it stops trying to get out technique just won't cut it. The deities require specific practices that sometimes go against the core values of secure, contain, protect. Take SCP-2845 for example. This entity, known as the Deer, is a being that requires an intense, deadly, and specific ritual to keep it properly contained. The SCP Foundation even had to outsource help in containing this anomaly. Anomalies such as these place the SCP Foundation at a crossroads of action or inaction, and when this issue is combined with a sarkic anomaly, that could bring catastrophic results should containment fail. They need to make the difficult choice of letting the anomaly stay where it is without intervention for the safety of the world. This nightmare started in the year 1916. During the Battle of Transylvania of the First World War, as bullets flew and the smell of smoke pervaded the noses of the scared soldiers, bloodlusting beasts were waiting their time to strike. Staking behind the unnaturally curved trunks of the trees that lived in the nearby Hoya forest, soldiers, armed with weapons and tactical armor, were quickly and brutally attacked and consumed by entities that would become known as the Pale Men. At the time, not much was known about these Pale Men, and they were believed to be a myth among the local populace, meant to scare invading soldiers from stepping on Romanian land. But when 244 people go randomly missing in a single night, with no obvious signs of death, no bodies ever being found, and reports of Pale Men dashing through trenches and within the surrounding Hoya forest, the SCP Foundation would surely have to intervene. This would not occur until 1919, however, as World War I raged on, diverting Foundation attention away from these mysterious deaths. Agents Frederick Harper and Reese Gorman, posing as military officials and local law enforcement, began to speak with the locals around the Hoya forest and the surviving soldiers. While shell shock rocked the soldiers with guilt and terror, Gorman was able to ascertain that the soldiers' stories of the Pale Men were too consistent to be a falsehood created out of stress. The Pale Men were described as living vampires, more bat than human, and deadly fast, appearing in quick flashes before dragging the unsuspecting victims to their untimely deaths within the Hoya forest. Meanwhile, Agent Gorman spoke with members of a village within the Hoya forest near the battle site. Their demeanor was cold, which was expected. He was an outsider, speaking rudimentary Romanian in an obviously foreign tongue. The village people claimed ignorance, declaring that they had never heard stories of Pale Men and did not subscribe to fairy tales. Gorman, realizing he was unwanted, nearly cut his losses before the elder of the village stopped him. This elder, an old man draped in hand-knit scarves and red silks, invited the agent into his home and gave him the truth. These villagers were followers of Sarkicism. The home of the elder was decorated with Sarkic glyphs and paintings detailing the stories of Yaldabaoth, the primary god of the Sarkists, battling Mechane, the legendary broken god. On a lectern sat scrolls and dusty tomes detailing Sarkic history, from former kings to stories of battles that were waged against the Mechanites and Davites. The elder explained that there was a Sarkic god within the Hoya forest, known as the Mother, who sends out her children to feed and help her grow even larger. The village worshipped the Mother and tried their best to keep her at bay by conducting ritual sacrifices to her and her brood. However, the advent of World War I led to difficulties in containing their rituals, as they were living in an active war zone, and the Mother's children and their hunger were impossible to control, leading to the unfortunate deaths of the soldiers. Agent Gorman was eventually able to convince the elder to show them where the Mother resided, a temple superficially resembling other Eastern Orthodox monasteries, but this was no house of God that you or I would recognize. On the lower level, it contained an ancient beast, starving for blood and sacrifice. This place soon became designated SCP-2191, otherwise known as the Dracula Factory. New containment procedures were quickly enacted. 20 armed guards were placed around the temple, with strict orders to dispatch any entity that exits the structure. Standard containment procedures for anomalous buildings were enacted as well, preventing all non-Foundation personnel from entering SCP-2191 and authorizing the use of lethal force when necessary. Access to SCP-2191 has allowed Foundation biologists to research the entities that were known as the Pale Men. These creatures were found to be genetically human, but with a variety of alterations that should have resulted in fatalities. These entities were subsequently designated SCP-2191-1. SCP-2191-1 entities appear to be more bat than human, with large conical ears that end in sharp tips, upturned noses, and the ability to communicate via echolocation. This echolocation ability comes in handy, as SCP-2191-1 are completely blind. Their eyes have recessed into their skulls, and a layer of skin has grown over them. The entities also lack pigmentation, leaving them starky pale, appearing to be made more of porcelain than flesh or bone. These entities are predators, solely hunting living human beings, ignoring human cadavers or any non-human animal. They hunt by spreading through the Hoya forest and chasing their victims. Once caught, SCP-2191 entities will inject their victims with a paralytic agent by stabbing them with a sharp bone that has grown from their wrists. They will then unhinge their jaws, allowing a leech-like entity to exit their mouths and begin the feeding process by latching onto the victim's neck. This leech, designated as SCP-2191-2, will first inject the body with digestive enzymes, converting organ, muscle, and bone into liquid before consuming the resulting fluids. The feeding process can last anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes, depending on the size of its prey. These are highly skilled and sophisticated predators, and while they lack the higher intelligence of non-anomalous humans, they make up for it in ruthless ferocity. It would only make sense that the Foundation would enact strict containment procedures to avoid the loss of human life. But while these containment methods worked for a time, a series of anomalous events connected to SCP-2191 transpired over the next 70 years. The first event was in late September of 1932. The Irissos earthquake devastated the Chalkidiki Peninsula of Greece, leaving houses crumbled, civilians homeless, and causing 490 reported casualties. Surveys of the damage conducted by the Greek government found that 126 people who lived in the affected areas could not be accounted for. The question now arises: where are these missing people? 7 years later in 1939, this time in Turkey, the Erzincan earthquake struck the country, resulting in the catastrophic deaths of approximately 33,000 people. Among the survivors, reports of a great serpent were given from all who witnessed the event. The Foundation then intervened, posing as members of an international disaster recovery agency. Reports from the locals remained the same: a great serpent, a deep red and black in color and incomprehensibly massive, casting dark shadow miles long, rose from the ground at the onset of the earthquake and writhed in the air as the earth shook. For a period of 3 years, nothing related to SCP-2191 transpired, and the Foundation believed that the anomaly had gone dormant. That was until an earthquake struck Vranța, Romania in 1940. While casualties were low compared to the earthquake in Turkey, reports from local survivors had repeated claims that pale men attacked the fleeing people as the earthquake occurred, chasing after them and tackling them, never to be seen again. With a large-scale event like this and potential witnesses to anomalous beings, the SCP Foundation was risking a broken masquerade scenario should the information spread. Broken masquerade scenarios are considered an XK-class scenario by the SCP Foundation, and as such, they employed a media blackout and had newspapers state that the witnesses of these vampire attacks were nothing but superstition. In March 1953 in Turkey, the Yenisgoyen earthquake led to the deaths of over 1,000 people. The Foundation, once again posing as members of an international disaster recovery agency, interviewed survivors and attempted to find any connection to the preceding events. Reports from survivors again told a consistent story. They witnessed the arm of a blood-red octopus rupture from the earth when the quake began, behaving similar to the great serpent writhing in the sky, and reported that pale men were seen attacking survivors in the night as they searched for places to sleep. These sightings of pale men persisted for over a month after the earthquake, before amnestics could be distributed. Another event occurred in March of 1977 in Romania. It It was a similar story to all the others, with over 1,500 civilians dying as a result of the Valencia earthquake, and 800 civilians being declared missing. Foundation officials embedded in the Romanian government were told that reports of pale men and tendrils pulling victims beneath the ground began to surface, leading to media blackouts and amnestic distribution as panic spread throughout the region. The Foundation couldn't figure out what was causing these events. When they began instituting the containment procedures around SCP-2191, no SCP-2191-1 entities were able to exit the temple without being quickly dispatched. So how were these events occurring, especially in areas so far away from the Hoya forest? Could it be that the large creature seen breaching the earth was responsible? The Foundation decided to return to the village that originally told them about the temple to interview their elder once more. Dr. Judith Lowe was given permission to conduct the interview. She was a senior employee of the SCP Foundation and had multiple doctorates in Sarkic history and Sarkic anthropology. Her expertise in the subject was unmatched. Dr. Lowe had written multiple studies on the Sarkic culture and understood the only thing that satiates Sarkic gods: blood. With this knowledge in mind, Dr. Lowe met with Draga Negrescu, the current elder of the village. Draga was an old woman, wrapped in the red silks and scarves as the previous elder. Dr. Lowe began to interview and jumped immediately into the subject, asking Draga what she could tell her about the temple. Draga replied, stating that the temple was home of what they called the Mother. The Mother was not unlike a queen bee, as she sends her drones out to collect blood much like bees collect nectar. Draga continued, stating that her village acted as the beekeepers to the Mother, helping the hive flourish and stay full before the SCP Foundation intervened. Draga expressed that it was imperative that they would be allowed to continue their sacred duty of satiating the Mother. Dr. Lowe needed more information on who exactly the Mother was. Draga Negrescu told her that the Mother was once a princess and the daughter of a Sarkic blood empress in Aditum, the ancient Sarkic capital. She was a strikingly beautiful girl, wearing the finest of clothes and had long, dark red hair, a trait common to those with ancient royal Sarkic bloodlines. When she walked through the streets of Aditum, all eyes turned toward her. The Grand Karcist Ion was struck by her beauty and kidnapped the princess, claiming her as his own. She became his mistress. While she first hated her position, she slowly grew to worship Grand Karcist Ion as a god. While Grand Karcist Ion is seen as a deity now, he was not during his reign as the king of the Sarkic Empire. The princess begged to bear Ion's children as a result. She was blessed by the Grand Karcist and was planted in the Koya forest to grow large and wide. Ion commanded the princess to bear as many children as she could muster, and she did. The princess birthed Ion's children, the Pale Ones, for all of eternity, and would let them feed as Ion would want. Draga stated that she and her village are no different than the Pale Men, as they were tasked with keeping the Mother fed and satisfied. Draga then let slip this chilling remark.
The Mother and the land are now one. Her earthen womb swells, and soon she will rupture. All around you is tinder for the gods.
It seems as though the Foundation's containment efforts led to the deadly earthquakes and deaths of thousands of people. By stopping the practices of this village to contain the Mother through ritual, they had potentially caused an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. One question remained though: where is the Mother? An investigation into the tunnel system located below SCP-2191 would lead to the answer. Mobile task force units that specialized in underground exploration, such as the Mole Rats, were sent to the tunnel system below the temple, armed with weapons to dispatch any loose SCP-2191-1 entities. These agents discovered a grisly sight: a massive writhing mass below SCP-2191. Researchers, believing Draga's story, ascertained that this was the Mother and designated it as SCP-2191-3. This entity is a massive blood-red organism buried deep beneath the earth, where SCP-2191 stands. The true size of the entity has proven entirely impossible to measure, but root-like appendages have been found to extend throughout the tunnels below the earth. These appendages were found to secrete a toxic, highly corrosive acid. SCP-2191-3 uses this fluid to create tunnels, which explains the odd tunnels below SCP-2191-2. Measurements place the area SCP-2191 spread to approximately 6,600,000 square kilometers under the Balkan Peninsula. For comparison's sake, SCP-3000, the amnestic-producing eel god Anatashisha, is a measly 900 kilometers in length at maximum. With that in mind, now we can see the gargantuan problem the SCP Foundation is dealing with. SCP-2191-3 is sapient, meaning it has an innate sense of understanding and self-awareness, and it exerts control over SCP-2191-1 and SCP-2191-2 organisms via the release of complex pheromones. SCP-2191-1 entities act as feeder drones for SCP-2191-3. It has since been discovered that civilians native to several isolated villages in the vicinity of the Hoya Forest have actively provided human sacrifices for SCP-2191 as a means of minimizing the seismic activity that occurs when it is famished, and this worked to satiate the entity and prevent further damage to the Earth and its people. The Foundation now stood at the crossroad between active containment and allowing the people who knew and understood the anomaly to contain it themselves. The Foundation motto is Secure, Contain, Protect. However, if they allow Draga Negrescu and her village to continue their sacrifices, they will be unable to fulfill any of these core values. But SCP-2191 will not be wreaking havoc. This dilemma led to the involvement of the O5 Council. A joint statement from them reads, "There are some who wish to believe that the Foundation has never nor will ever cater to the designs and desires of an anomalous entity. Foundation efforts to contain SCP-2191 are now thought to have inadvertently led to the deaths of approximately 40,000 people over 45 years. The obvious choice would be to neutralize the threat, and we've tried. The number of civilian and Foundation casualties being well beyond acceptable numbers. In order to contain the larger threat, we must allow it to feed. We are aware of the offense caused by this procedure. This is not the first time, nor it will be the last, that the Foundation has been forced to commit a lesser evil in the prevention of a greater one. We do believe that, in the end, our current method is the most preferable, with regards to both ethics and efficiency. We are fully aware that every sacrifice feeds SCP-2191-3, allowing it and its brood to thrive. But we are not about to sacrifice the entire Balkan Peninsula to neutralize that threat. Not yet." It was clear that the SCP Foundation had no choice but to allow the villagers who lived around SCP-2191 and the Mother to continue their practices. Upon their involvement, there was catastrophe after catastrophe that would only stop once the correct people, Draga Negrescu and her villagers, could return to their way of life and end this madness. A final containment procedure was ordered as a result. The SCP Foundation would maintain surveillance operations via the use of closed-circuit security cameras and drone footage. All personnel of the SCP Foundation would be prohibited from directly interfering with SCP-2191 or the ritual practices of communities within the vicinity of the Hoya Forest, which include blood or human sacrifices to SCP-2191. Exploration of SCP-2191 would only be allowed by remote-controlled drones. Lethal force is only authorized should SCP-2191 or any of the creatures that live beneath it breach containment. Should the Foundation fail in upholding the ritual practices that keep the Mother at bay, well, Draga Negrescu said it best.
All around them is tinder for the gods.
The SCP Foundation seeks out anomalies across land, air, and sea, and they've encountered just about everything. From roller coaster cars rocketing through the Midwestern skies to world-destroying horrors deep underground in alternate dimensions. So it's no surprise to hear that they've happened upon something right out of an old sailor's ghostly tale. An actual, real-life ghost ship. You can almost smell the salty sea air and hear the eerie drone of a foghorn just thinking about it. But of course, with the SCP Foundation, it's never simple. It's never just a ghost ship, but something more lurking beneath the surface of that chilly sea. Several years ago, in Arcachon Bay, on the southwest coast of France, something unusual began to happen. Between nautical twilight on one day and nautical twilight on the next, a mysterious ship would appear. It was a 19th century brig with 2 square-rigged masts. It would materialize from nothing, simply fading into existence and sailing around the bay. The first sighting was reported by an elderly man in a fishing boat, who stated that, as the ghostly ship drew closer to him, his own vessel stopped responding to his control. He jerked the wheel back and forth, attempting to steer away from the brig, but the boat would not respond to his direction. Suddenly, as if yanked by an unseen force, the fishing boat was pulled underwater all at once. The fisherman luckily was able to grab a life preserver and free himself from the boat. He floated alone for hours until he was spotted by another passing boat. He tried to tell them of the unusual ship he had seen and what had happened, but by then the brig had disappeared. The ship continued to appear on a regular basis, every time staying within a kilometer of its original manifestation point, always at the same time of day. Its effect on nearby ships and vessels was consistent too, unfortunately for anyone who happened to be in the water at the same time. Wheels, pedals, and other methods of directional movement would stop working, and the vessel would be pulled underwater. Most of the time, the people on board drowned. After a pattern was established and it became clear that the ship was definitely anomalous, the Foundation designated it SCP-5987. A 3-kilometer radius was set up around the ship, blocking off the sea and air traffic. Unfortunately, this was not enough to prevent people from entering the radius anyway. As more and more civilians sighted the ship and the drownings became increasingly difficult to cover up, the Foundation decided to attempt to neutralize the ship. A task force was approved to search the area for anything that could be used to put the apparition to an end. As it turns out, sometimes the rules the old ghost stories teach you are true. You need to figure out the correct way to put an angry ghost to rest. On January 1st, 2019, the SCPs submarine Nephthys was deployed in the bay with Captain Domer at its helm. The submarine approached SCP-5987, and as it entered its area, the communication system went down and the submarine was pulled underwater. SCP Foundation Command attempted to re-establish communication with the submarine, and after several tries, it was able to get through. Captain Domer reported that the submarine was partially damaged from colliding with the ocean floor, but was still safe and operational. The communication system had come back online once the submarine had reached the bottom, and the pull of SCP-5967 had ceased. The research team deliberated over what their next step would be, but their decision was made for them. When SCP-5987 retreated further from the submarine and raised a white flag from its mainmast. At this point, Nephthys was instructed to proceed to the point where the brig had first appeared. The submarine reached the manifestation point, where they spotted wooden and steel pieces jutting out of the ocean floor. Noting that this was clear evidence of a shipwreck, Nephthys switched to search mode to focus further on the small wooden wreck. Captain Domer then deployed the diving team to clear out the wreckage and inspect it for anything significant. Several skeletons were found, corroded by the salt water to varying degrees. As spectrally significant remains do not decay or corrode, according to Foundation research, the skeletons were deemed unimportant to the mission and left where they were found. One of the divers, Agent Lacroix, found a carved figurehead resembling a siren or a mermaid beneath the hull. Unlike every other part of the ship, the figurehead was not damaged at all, completely untouched by the elements. It was collected and brought aboard the submarine to be taken back to the Foundation for further study. As the submarine returned to the surface and made its way back across the bay, the chime of a bell rang out across the water. As the sound faded from the air, SCP-5987 faded from view. The next day, when nautical twilight rolled around, the brig was nowhere to be seen. Removing the figurehead, whatever its significance was, had somehow tamed the ghostly ship. But what was the ship? Where did it come from? What did the figurehead have to do with it at all? The figurehead, designated SCP-5987-1, was brought back to Foundation Area 34 and examined by the Marine Studies Department. After some time, they were able to trace its origin. SCP-5987 once sat at the front of the Duc du Danzig, a French privateer brig from the early 19th century, though analysis of its material indicates it was made 200 years before the construction of the ship. The figurehead has some unusual properties that set it apart from the rest of the wreckage found in the bay. It is able to control all seafaring vessels within a kilometer, sinking them or running them aground. It was on the Duc de Danzig when it sank in 1811 after being burned at sea. This experience was extreme enough that it created a spectral imprint on the location. An old American Secure Containment Initiative file provided additional insight into the origins of SCP-5987 and the events leading to its demise. The file described item 6789-AH, a humanoid with possible ontokinetic properties, named François Arignanou. He was a French corsair, captain of the Duc de Danzig. A bounty of 10,000 francs was placed on his head by a group known as the American Secure Containment Initiative, a precursor to the SCP Foundation from the 19th century, with a bounty of an additional 100 francs for each member of his crew. According to the file, Arignanou was believed to have been some sort of anomalous being. This assumption was formed from observations of the captain physically controlling the paths of other ships within his line of sight. While standing on the bow of the Duc de Danzig, Arignanou was able to manipulate the riggings and sails of enemy ships in any way he wanted. Some of the ships were pulled underwater, their crews drowned. Others were dashed against rocks and destroyed. Some others were run aground and looted. This ability allowed the captain to rise through the ranks of the French military, capturing over 20 military and merchant ships in less than 10 years. The initiative planned to capture the captain when he disembarked his ship and sink the ship in order to prevent him from escaping custody. However, before they could implement their plan, his own crew beat them to it. While the exact details of what happened are unknown, an 1812 report published in a French newspaper described an encounter between a Navy ship and the Duc de Danzig. They spotted the ship floating at sea, bobbing on the waves and heading in no particular direction. Concerned, the Navy crew determined the best course of action was to reach out to the crew of the other ship and determine if they were Frenchmen in need of assistance. As the Navy ship drew closer, the crew was perplexed and worried by a heavy silence that hung over the other ship. There was no noise coming from the deck, no yells for help, no shouted orders, only the slap of the water on wood. The ship did not appear to be damaged at all either. There was no sign of cannon fire that might have blown out a part of the ship, nor was there any damage from a recent storm. There was nothing that should have been keeping the ship from continuing on its course. The Navy ship came up beside the Duc de Danzig, with a group of sailors preparing to board it. As they climbed aboard, they were horrified at what they found. The deck was positively drenched in blood, smeared across its surface as if the entire crew of at least 50 men had emptied their veins right onto it. As the Navy men continued their search, the source of the blood soon became entirely too clear. The ropes had been turned into makeshift nooses, corpses hanging from them and swinging limply. Some other bodies were strewn across the deck, abdomens ripped open and their entrails yanked out, thrown to the side. Others had their faces collapsed by cannonballs, even though there were no signs of enemy fire. A closer look revealed that the blasts had come from their own cannons, turned on themselves, aimed at their own faces, and fired. The captain himself, reeking of death and putrefaction, had been tied to the main mast. Swords were stabbed through his hands and his feet, like a crucifixion. The naval officers made their way to the hold, where they found bloodied papers identifying the ship. They were uncertain what had happened, but posited that the crew had gone mad while lost at sea, turning on the captain and then each other. To be safe, they decided to set the ship on fire and leave it there to sink to the bottom of a watery grave. With Captain François Arignanou disposed of, though not by them, the initiative closed their case file on him and the story was forgotten. At least it was until the 2019 mission to investigate SCP-5987. With the discovery of the figurehead from the wreckage, a centuries-old mystery was solved. According to the researchers tasked with examining the figurehead, it resented having to do the work of war and destruction and disliked working at the beck and call of the Duc de Danzig and its captain. Somehow it compelled the crew to destroy each other and the captain in an attempt to free itself. When the naval officers discovered the carnage and set the ship ablaze, it was traumatic enough that whatever supernatural force powers the figurehead left a spectral disturbance behind. The designation SCP-5987 was then created. SCP-5987 has been treated for saltwater protection and attached to a historically accurate miniature 19th century sailing ship. The ship, with the figurehead attached, is kept in a saltwater enclosure in Area 34's Marine Observatory. It is checked once a month for any signs of damage or degradation. The figurehead uses its ability to control ships to sail its new home around the saltwater enclosure. It seems to enjoy spending its time this way. and several of the officers assigned to guard the enclosure have reported hearing voices singing the French sea shanty, "Boney was a warrior." When the guards opened the door to look for the source of the voices, however, they could not find a source. Somehow the figurehead is able to sing as it sails around its miniature sea. It's not every day that an SCP has a happy ending, but this seems to be one of those rare cases. The ghost ship sightings have ceased altogether. The case has been closed, and the anomaly is at rest. It's not hard to imagine that the figurehead is enjoying its new peaceful life, no longer forced to sink ships or be used as a weapon of war. Instead, it can simply float and sing its songs.
Ace isn't having a great night. It'd be a stretch to say he'd had a great week, month, year, decade, or life. That's why he figured a little stint in Sin City might be the perfect thing to blow the cobwebs away. In the last 12 months, he'd been laid off at the job where he'd given 15 years of service. His wife, also of 15 years, had left him for the very boss that had fired him from that company, who also just so happened to be younger, more handsome, and better off financially. Oh, and a few days ago, his pet spaniel had been sent on an express trip to the pearly gates by a Mack truck while chasing after a rogue frisbee. But even in the deep mire of misfortune, Ace had hope. He'd always wanted a weekend in Las Vegas, but he could never get the time off work. Or his wife didn't like the idea of him going, and he could never find someone to look after his dog while he was gone. Now, none of those would be a problem anymore, so he could live it up in Vegas like he'd always dreamed. And boy, using the last of his severance package, he certainly did so. He tried his hand as a high roller at the big boy roulette tables in Caesar's Palace. He attended a Siegfried and Roy show. Oh, I don't think we mentioned this all happened back in the early 1990s. He lived large off of the exorbitant buffets, drank his weight in overpriced Vegas booze, and even spent some time in the company of ladies who liked to, well, let's just say, put on the red light. But they wouldn't be the only ones putting on the red light this weekend. In fact, the whole city, lit up with millions of lumens of artificial glow, seemed to take an odd red hue. Like even in this legendary mecca for debauchery, there was still somehow deeper for the whole thing to sink. And it certainly could sink, straight down, to the fourth circle of hell. Ace's luck changed when he met a strange, pale man in one of the casino lounges, dressed in a fine suit. He couldn't tell whether it was just the results of the various substances that he'd imbibed, but he could swear the man had a weird smell around him, like something burning, and also a strange and highly striking deformity. Growths that looked like two small, curved horns on the man's forehead. But the man certainly spoke a good game. In fact, the man's words were downright mesmerizing, as he offered him a sweet deal on a high-stakes game of poker. If Ace won, he got everything back: his wife, his job, and his sweet little dog. If he lost, well, the stranger would get Ace's immortal soul. Fair deal, right? In his intoxicated state, Ace certainly thought so. It's not like souls were real anyway. The problem was, just as all the substances he'd consumed had impaired his judgment, it also impaired his poker-playing skills. Soon enough, he had lost badly, and the pale, horned stranger wasn't interested in going for best of three. What seemed like a joke at first didn't feel so funny when the ground started rumbling, when the cracks and fissures opened up, spilling out terrible, searing light from somewhere deep and terrible down below. And then the chains, half glowing with heat, and the parts of them that weren't black and wet and covered in long, serrated barbs, they wrapped around Ace's body, enveloping him, the sudden pain too intense for him to even scream. He just gave a choked gasp as the shock pushed the last gust of air out of his lungs. And then he was dragged into the ground. Because Las Vegas is a city where fortune often changes, sometimes from bad to so much worse. But this isn't a story about a demon loose in Las Vegas. No, it's a story of tens of thousands of them spilling through the streets, feeding on the inherent Tartarian resonance energy produced by man's darkest desires and most shameful misdeeds. And there's nobody better to deal with this than the fine folks at the SCP Foundation. But for once, up against an entire city filled with both powerful demons and human civilians that they neither want to hurt nor expose to the anomalies, they may have met their match. You'll just have to keep watching and see what happens, won't you? Between January 12th and January 16th, 1992, the Foundation became aware of the massive quantity of demons somehow inhabiting Las Vegas. They also had the frightening realization that the number of demons in question seemed to be reaching critical mass. So much so that not only were the levels of Tartarian resonance energy off the map, they were also seeing Hume levels spike downwards. This was always a concerning matter, as it meant that the very nature of reality itself was starting to bend and contort. If they didn't deal with this quickly, they'd be looking at a full reality collapse scenario. Field agents were dispatched to the city when this frightening Kennec-class event was first dinged in the Foundation system. And they soon realized that even from casual observation, things were far worse on the ground than they first imagined. Horned demons were cavorting everywhere, committing various debauched activities that are, in some cases, so intense that we can't even cover them here. And the strangest part was that the humans among them didn't even really seem to mind. When field agents attempted to interview them, they found them to be strangely lethargic subjects, bored, confused, almost distracted. They didn't want to have to talk to these boring suits about all these details. They were in Vegas, baby. It was time for gambling, partying, and other generally sinful activities. And by Satan, the demons around them were loving every minute of it. The whole thing was becoming a feedback loop of epic proportions. The more demons arrived, the more they influenced humans to sin, the more Tartarian resonance energy they produced, and the more demons arrived to feed on that, like a satanic greenhouse effect. As the Hume levels continued to plummet and Las Vegas fused more and more with the fourth circle of hell, that's the greed circle for anyone who hasn't read the cliff notes of Dante's Inferno, huge, ill-defined shapes started to appear in the desert. They were gargantuan demonic entities who feel like they'd been summoned to an all-you-can-sin buffet and were slowly moving towards the city. It was time for the Foundation to up its game. An elite team was formed to act as the primary incident committee, formed of Applied Force Liaison Joseph Kurtz, Occult Sciences Senior Researcher Randall House, HMCL Supervisor Lee Thompson, and Large-Scale Containment Specialist Yusuf Ali. With a case this large and potentially catastrophic, they'd need to focus on trying to re-establish normalcy first and worry about containment second. While they considered their deeper courses of action, a mobile task force, MTF Omega-18, also known as Patriots, were given the task of infiltrating the cursed city and establishing an operational command center on the inside. No easy feat in a major city absolutely crawling with demonic entities and drunk morons. But with a convoy of armored vehicles and helicopters on their side, it seemed like they had the right stuff. As the Patriots convoy entered the strip via the Beltway, they soon found opposition from demons using broken bottles, blunt objects, and the nasty flames from their limited pyromancy ability. While the Foundation was equipped with guns that had blessed bullets, lethal to most demonic entities, there were too many civilians mixed in amongst the crowds to risk spraying and praying. So helicopters descended, dropping large buckets of holy water over the strip to ward off the demons. After a light skirmish, the Patriots were able to get a grip on the MGM Grand Hotel to act as the Foundation's Sin City foothold, complete with a command center for the next stages of this vital mission. In order to stop the situation from spiraling rapidly out of control, several mobile task forces donated members and resources to assist in the effort. In order to get a more focused attack on the source of all these horrors, a smaller, more targeted squad was also put together and sent into the city, featuring Applied Force Liaison Joseph Kurtz and Occultic Sciences Senior Researcher Randall House. Putting his occult knowledge to good use, House had discovered that the epicenter of all this madness seemed to be coming from beneath Caesar's palace. If they had any hope of restoring normalcy before Las Vegas literally went to hell, it was down there. The larger battalions of mobile task force operatives battled demons in the streets, some who'd grown so powerful from the quantities of Tartarian resonance energy that they'd become veritable holy bullet sponges. Meanwhile, the mission team with Kurtz and House slipped into the city and descended into the basement of Caesar's palace, which, as it turned out, was the nexus point for a vast series of infernal tunnels. However, not everything was all fire and brimstone. As they descended deeper and deeper into the tunnels, they found a surprising sight. A classy Art Nouveau elevator. Traveling up to the top floor using said elevator revealed a luxurious suite, the kind that Vegas casinos typically only reserve for their most wealthy and hopelessly addicted high rollers, overlooking the reddening lights of the entire city. And in that suite was a mysterious figure, wearing a bathrobe and a top hat, sipping from a dainty little teacup. You wouldn't know just from looking at him that he was a god of death, one of the most powerful beings in the cosmology of the Roman Empire, Pluto, the steward of the underworld, and, as it turned out, the CEO of the Caesar's Palace Casino. He revealed a truly strange series of secrets, that Las Vegas itself had been founded by demons centuries ago, specifically libertarian demons trying to escape the exorbitant tax rate levied against the denizens of hell. In a way, it was the perfect hub of human sin, a place where, with a little demonic influence, the human race could be encouraged to act out all of its darkest desires and feed demons not only their money, but almost limitless Tartarian resonance energy in the process. You had to admit, it was a pretty airtight plot, all things considered. But one unlikely hero was willing to step up to the plate and risk it all, by which we mean everyone in the entire city and even his own soul, to potentially save the world. It wasn't one of the soldiers trained to lay down their lives for the good of humanity. No, it was Randall House, the occult researcher. He challenged Pluto to a wager, something demons historically have a really hard time resisting. If House won, he got Caesar's palace. If Pluto won, he got the whole city and House's very own soul. Pluto rejected House's assertion that the wager should be fought over a game of Magic the Gathering. So instead, they settled on the classic game of blackjack, the battle of choice for a real gambler's gambler. And with everything to play for, the battle was a tense one. A demon card dealer even appeared to help mediate the game and keep things fair. Cards were dealt, and dealt, and dealt, until Pluto went bust, and House won the game. Being a god of his word, Pluto fled, taking thousands of demons bound to his will with him. Caesar's palace now belonged to House and the SCP Foundation. With this many demons removed, the Hume levels rose back to normal. The day had been saved, all thanks to one superb gambling trick from researcher House. He bribed the dealer with $10,000 from the Foundation budget. Hey, if taxes in hell are really that bad, House reasoned that 10 grand was a lot of money no matter what side of the Earth's crust you chose to hang your hat on. And on that superb gamble, he went home with the entire pot. By 1992's end, the SCP Foundation had thankfully gotten a foothold in Sin City, having used House's devious wind to establish Site-666, a giant pyramidal structure given the harmless cover of being the Luxor Las Vegas casino. In fact, it serves two far more delicate purposes. The first is a scientific matter. The entire building is not just a Foundation site, but an active machine. The House Nicholas Theoplanar Vacuum Unit, designed by the site director Randall House himself. This machine satisfies the primary containment condition to prevent a full collapse of the city of Las Vegas into the fourth circle of hell, siphoning up the immense quantity of Tartarian resonance energy to keep reality in its proper place. The waste products are converted into alpha radiation and fired up harmlessly into the sky. It appears to the people around the city like a simple beam of light, advertising any other garish, light-polluting building out on the literally godforsaken strip. The other purpose of Site-666 is, naturally, as a base for specifically selected Foundation personnel deemed fit to take up the mantle of fighting the literal forces of the underworld. People with immense bravery, with the quality of temperance to avoid all the temptation going on around them. And of course, being at least a little spiritual certainly doesn't hurt. Of course, the demonic presence in the city holds plenty of power. The most powerful demonic casino owners have consolidated their vast sum of wealth and resources, forming the Nevada Gaming Commission. They rule over the dark art of gambling in Las Vegas with a tightly clenched brimstone fist. Only the mere humans of the SCP Foundation stationed at Site-666 can hold back their endless avarice. And if you're one of the debatably lucky people that the Foundation does decide is up to the task of keeping Las Vegas from truly going south, you may just wake up to the following highly classified email waiting for you in your inbox one day. You have received this email because you have been selected to be relocated to Site 666, located in Las Vegas, Nevada. No, this is not some cheeky off-site celebration. There will be alcohol. There will be gambling. There will be sin, but not for you. You've been picked to make sure what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. You will be dealing with demons, both literal and metaphorical. You'll be firing bullets blessed in factories, bathing in mass-produced holy water, and researching things that the Vatican would rather you not know. Vegas is called Sin City for a reason. We are in their home, but that doesn't mean we have to bow to them. With all that in mind, there is really only one rule in Under Vegas. The house always win. Violent chaos unfolds across the shoreline. Huge fleshy tendrils slither out of the water, grabbing people who try to flee and drag them into the depths, as giant harpoons made of bone whiz across the beach, cutting down unfortunate sunbathers in droves. It is a terrifying massacre, but you'd never in a million years be able to guess its source. On April 10th, 2010, something strange began to happen in the three Portlands. Now, the anomalous extra-dimensional city-state that overlaps with the locations of Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, and the Isle of Portland is no stranger to unusual occurrences. So it took the population a little while to notice that something was happening. But for some unknown reason, sailboats and motorboats were beginning to vanish from the city. The disappearances occurred overnight, when there was no one around to witness them. But slowly, the citizens began to notice that their friends and family members were going out in their watercrafts and never returning home. By April 15th, the civilians were becoming noticeably concerned, fearing the worst. On April 16th, their worst fears were confirmed when two local ghosts, Ankar Ahmed and Greg Moore, went for a nighttime stroll along the harbor. They heard a sudden commotion and rushed to the scene of the disturbance. They arrived just in time to see a living individual being dragged into the watery depths by a large, vein-like tendril. Ahmed asked Greg to wait on land while he ventured out into the water to look for the victim. Unfortunately, Ahmed never came back, and Greg took his story to the Three Portlands Police Department. After waiting a few days for the local man-eating clam populace to migrate, the FBI Unusual Incidents Unit mounted a formal investigation. On the morning of April 17th, all of the missing vehicles suddenly reappeared. This left the UIU and the people of the city with even more questions. Where had all the boats gone? Why were they suddenly back? And what had happened to the missing people who had not been returned along with them? On April 19th, UIU agents dove into the harbor to search for any unusual activity, and while they didn't spot anything especially strange, they did discover that there were fewer animals in the harbor than usual. On April 21st, the threat that had been preying on the citizens of Three Portlands actually made itself known. At 11:19 a.m., 17 boats moved away from the docks on their own, drifting up onto shore, though no one could be seen captaining any of them. As the boats lined up, they began to form a wall blocking access to the water. No one could get in or out. Civilians watched in shock as the boats began to warp and change before their eyes, growing thick masses of scales on their surfaces, sprouting harpoon guns that fired bony projectiles, and slashing veiny tendrils at anyone within reach. The citizens began to panic, running in every direction in an attempt to escape the monstrous boats. But they were too slow to evade the attacks, and the boats snatched them off of the shore and yanked them aboard, using their harpoons to impale those who managed to run farther than the tendrils could stretch. As the army of fleshy boats closed in around the shore, a tugboat broke through the surface of the water. Unlike the rest of the boats, it had a noticeable hole in its hull and was missing its wheelhouse. At an unnaturally quick pace, the tugboat began to advance onto land, using its tendrils to drag itself along the shore and into the more populous part of town. It grabbed civilians at random, absorbing their blood into its metallic surface as it went. Suddenly, it spotted Albert Izzat, a noted member of the Church of the Broken God, and began to focus its attack on him. But before the tugboat monster could reach Izzat, a city security golem interfered. Sadly, though the golem put up a valiant fight, the anomaly was able to destroy it by falling onto it again and again until the golem was no longer able to get back up. There are few creatures that would survive having a boat drop itself on top of them repeatedly, and sadly the security golem was not one of them. With the golem out of the way, the boat continued to drag itself through the streets wildly, crashing through the side of a local restaurant where its owner, an entity known as the Gruel, was in the middle of a busy brunch service. At the sight of the invading watercraft, the Gruel set down his pitcher of bottomless mimosas, wiped his hands on his apron, and grabbed his trusty dual-wield swords from underneath the counter. He kept them there in case someone attempted to dine and dash, but he figured they would do just fine against a blood-drinking tugboat. While the Gruel kept the tugboat busy, UIU forces were able to break through the barricade of boats for a brief period of time, allowing more security golems to enter the area, as well as allowing more citizens to escape. Unfortunately, this little victory was short-lived as further unforeseen horrors drudged themselves up from the deep. The reanimated corpses of various species native to the harbor began to crawl out of the water, surrounding the Gruel and allowing the tugboat to escape the fight. As it made its way back to the harbor, every boat it passed attempted to toss bodies onto the tugboat, covering it in fresh blood. Slowly but surely, the damage to the tugboat began to repair itself. Once the boat had regained its strength, it set its sights on a previously untouched cargo ship. An observing UIU officer determined that the boat was somehow attempting to convert the cargo ship to transform it into another one of its fleshy allies. But before the transformation could take place, a cargo crate broke open, spilling over 1,000 hardtack crackers. Suddenly, the tugboat stopped everything that it was doing. It took one tendril and began to count each individual cracker that had spilled out. While the tugboat was distracted with its task, a citizen offered the UIU use of their rare metals cannonball collection in the fight to apprehend the aggressive boat. One particular cannonball, made from electrum, was able to puncture the hull of one of the infected ships, rendering it motionless. They were elated to have found a weapon that worked against these boats. While the tugboat continued to count, the remaining townspeople gathered all of the electrum they could find and began to fight back against the boats. One by one, the boats sank, and all the while the tugboat continued to count. In the meantime, UIU officers managed to free the Gruel from his zombie attackers. They presented him with an electrum cannonball, which he proceeded to punch finger holes into and wield like a bowling ball. Then the Gruel had a score to settle. No one, whether human, ghost, or tugboat, was going to mess with his brunch. The Gruel barreled towards the harbor, grabbed hold of the still distracted tugboat, and punched it hard with his cannonball fist. If the tugboat could breathe, the punch would have knocked the air out of its lungs. The Gruel then threw the tugboat out of the water and continued the savage beating before preparing to destroy the battered vehicle once and for all. He lifted it up into the air, jumped up to follow it, and hit it with so much force that the tugboat careened through the air, colliding with a portal that had transported it to the Isle of Portland. Luckily, this portal could only be unlocked via a high-speed impact from a water-based vehicle. Speaking of luck, an SCP Foundation team was returning to the Isle from a failed mission just as the anomalous boat appeared in their reality. The object was knocked unconscious by the impact of its travel and the beating from the Gruel, and in its incapacitated state, it was transported to a nearby Foundation site. There it was contained and given the designation of SCP-6426. Due to its anomalous traits, including the consumption of blood, a talent for hypnosis, and a compulsive counting habit, it was also given the nickname the Vampire Boat. SCP-6426 is a Keter-class sapient hostile entity that, in an inactive state, bears the appearance of a harbor tugboat in a constant state of rust and degradation. Any blood or organs containing blood that come into contact with the boat will be absorbed through the metal, causing the degradation to visibly improve as a result. The most effective blood appears to come from humans, cetaceans, and a few specific species of cetaceans. The entity does not only use the absorbed blood to improve its appearance, but is also capable of using it to create organic additions to its body, including the vein-like tendrils spotted in the 3 Portlands, cognitohazardous eyes attached to bending eye stalks, harpoon guns, and cannons capable of firing ammunition made from anomalous species of barnacles. These barnacles are capable of reanimating dead tissue on contact, and SCP-6426 frequently uses them to create instances of SCP-6426-C, masses of reanimated tissue that the boat uses to aid in its attacks or self-defense. SCP-6426 uses its tendrils to grab prey and drag them towards itself, but the tendrils serve an additional purpose as well. Each of the tendrils has a mouth on the tip, similar in structure to that of the North American medicinal leech. When the tendril has made contact with its prey, the mouth will then bite into the spinal column of the creature, causing its brain function to cease as its canines grow long and hollow. Hard scales form on their skin, and their muscle mass and bone density increase. Once they have been transformed in this way, organisms taken by SCP-6426 are designated SCP-6426-A. These instances are used to the entity's advantage, helping it to extract blood from victims at a distance, as well as providing an additional line of defense and offense. In the event that SCP-6426 encounters another watercraft, it is able to use SCP-6426-A to convert the vehicle into an instance of SCP-6426-B. These converted boats are similar to SCP-6426 and are able to function on their own. However, they are unable to produce their own eye stalks or cannons, unable to create SCP-6426-A instances, and do not appear to be as intelligent as their creator. In the early days of its containment, the exact nature of the anomaly's intelligence was the subject of debate amongst the research staff. However, on one specific occasion, the Foundation was able to establish a line of direct communication with SCP-6426 and conduct the first, and so far the only, interview with the vampiric tugboat. The inciting incident occurred when the arrival of the Foundation's latest hardtack shipment was delayed, leaving the boat with nothing to count and nothing to keep it occupied. Freed from the bounds of counting, it managed to escape and grab hold of several Foundation staff members with its tendrils. After chasing the boat through the site, guards were able to corner it, prompting the boat to absorb the bodies it had taken and use the organic material to produce a siren that emitted the sound of a human voice. It is through this siren that SCP-6426 responded to interview questions, using the voice of one of its victims. Junior researcher Sajad Williamson, in spite of his protests, was selected to conduct the interview. His fellow staff members refused to take no for an answer, and as the newest hire, the unpleasant job fell on his shoulders. Much to everyone's surprise, the anomaly began the conversation rather politely, saying, "I am so sorry. I thought you were those self-righteous lunatics from the church. I apologize profusely for any trouble I may have caused, and I want to point out I fully support your mission. Yes, our first line of defense against the undersea menace. I am more than willing to punch sharks. Salacious, yes, right. How rude of me, yes." Dr. Williamson's first question concerned SCP-6426's apparent intended victim back in 3 Portlands, Albert Izzat. SCP-6426 responded, "Albert? His first name is really Albert." "Well, what other relationship is there to say besides the hunter and the hunted? Admiral Izzat is a ruthless man, known for terrorizing and slaughtering people like me. He was leading a search party of those barbaric notophiles, intending to gut me like a seal." "What do you mean, people like you?" Dr. Williamson inquired. "Free thinkers, of course. People who are unafraid to break from the mold to carve their own path in life instead of following the predetermined route set by that ignorant check valve. The church is built upon a foundation of lies. No one's really a petty officer on this ship. We're all just cabin boys, stumbling around in the dark as we follow the commands of an offhand COB. If you want real power, real freedom, all you have to do is listen for the call of the beast. Open the porthole, and he'll squeeze you right through." Dr. Williamson, feeling rather in over his head, attempted to convince one of his colleagues to take over. When he refused, however, Dr. Williamson continued, "Could you explicate your activities within the harbor and how you arrived there?" "Well, After I got the botswans off my trail, I found a cave to hide in. I was forced to hide in, yes, forced to hide deep in the cave, which turned out to be a tunnel. Surprisingly, the tunnel led to some coastal community where I took refuge, licking my wounds in the safety of the depths as those zealots stalked the surface. I spent my time preparing, gathering the strength necessary to face them once more, until I was ambushed, assaulted within my hideout by a boatswain. I fought for my life as I was forced out into the open and descended upon by a manner of monsters and freaks, all this orchestrated by that scumbag Izzard. I was beaten within an inch of my life before. I'm not quite sure what happened after that. I believe I was knocked unconscious. You'll have to illuminate me on how I came to be in your custody. At this point, the interview began to veer in an odd direction. The boat expressed confusion about the nature of Williamson's questions, specifically how little they related to the subject of sharks and punching them. It was at this point that the site director sought guidance from the Multi-U department. A researcher there informed Williamson about the confusion. SCP-6426 had mistaken the SCP Foundation for another organization, the Shark Punching Center. Dr. Williamson resumed the interview, prepared to play along and keep the boat comfortable. Unfortunately, Williamson was a terrible liar. Yes, we are the Shark Punching Center. We will determine if you are a suitable candidate to carry out the mission to search, punch, and contain salations. This verbal misstep caused SCP-6426 to become suspicious. After a moment, it pieced together the truth and began to throw itself against the wall in a desperate attempt to escape. It was apprehended by security guards, who impaled it with a naval ram and returned the watercraft to its containment cell. The exact reason for its apparent fear and hatred of the Foundation is currently unknown, and the boat has made no attempt to speak since. Currently, SCP-6426 is kept in a 39-meter by 39-meter by 50-meter containment chamber. Beneath the chamber, there is an artificial lava tube. The tugboat has a naval ram through its hull and engine, holding it in place. This ram is checked daily for signs of degradation, as it is the primary force keeping the anomaly immobile. If the ram is ever removed or damaged somehow, a failsafe system will activate, releasing 100 hardtack crackers and 2 pieces of electrum into the containment chamber. This is intended to keep the tugboat occupied until the naval rod can be replaced. If for some reason the naval rod fails and the boat runs out of hardtack to count, well, there will be nowhere on water or land that we can hide. In the long history of the world, the planet has played host to a wide variety of ancient civilizations. There are far too many of those for any one video to cover. People make it their careers to discover and catalog the civilizations that preceded us in the modern era. Archaeologists and historians make it their life's work to learn everything there is to know about these mighty empires and kingdoms that span vast swaths of land where there are now dozens of countries. A lot of these civilizations are famous, even school children know about them. Take a look at the Roman Empire, for example. Everyone knows about the mighty Roman Empire. Julius Caesar took control of the Roman Republic and created the empire that would go on to be one of the largest empires in history at the time. It controlled practically everything in Europe and North Africa, and even parts of Asia. The Romans made amazing advancements in culture, architecture, law, and practically everything else. In fact, their legacy can even be seen in pop culture today. The American Senate is modeled off the Roman Senate, and practically every nation in the world has their own kind of wine, a Roman invention. Or take the Macedonian Empire. A lot of people don't know its name, but you almost definitely know the person who created it, Alexander the Great. At only 20, he took his father's throne. Then he began launching military expeditions, and it soon became clear that young Alexander was a brilliant tactician. Never defeated in battle, he managed to extend his vast empire across all of West Asia and North Africa, stretching all the way to Egypt and India. Like Caesar would go on to do after him, he managed to create one of the largest empires in history. Except he did it all before he even turned 30. Though he died young and his empire was split apart by his generals, he brought Greek thought, culture, and philosophy, not to mention science, to the far reaches of Inner Asia. And of course, there is the Mongol Empire, led by the fearsome Genghis Khan. The Mongols, a nomadic people from Central Asia, were divided into dozens of distinct tribes until Genghis Khan united them under one flag. And from there, they spread outward violently into the rest of Asia, conquering China, Korea, Eastern Europe, and practically all of Asia. In doing so, they created the largest empire in history and killed somewhere near 40 million people in their conquests, 10% of the world's population at the time. But they also created a safe trade route from China to Europe, what is now known as the Silk Road, and their innovations with cavalry would go on to inform warfare using horses for the next 800 years. Moving out of Asia, there are also the legendary Mayans. The Mayans were more of a loose confederation of different tribes, working together to advance a common civilization. They didn't conquer as much land as the others, only one area in Central America, but they crafted a complex society with laws, civic duties, social rules, and extremely advanced religious rites and architecture. If you go to South America today, you can still see the remnants of their empire. Step pyramids that look sort of like ziggurats, deep in the South American jungle interior. They invented astronomy, calendars, writing, and many forms of art like mosaics, all without contact with European society. Needless to say, the advancements empires have made throughout history are so important, we use them in our daily lives all the time. And we know a lot about these ancient empires too. How could we not? They've made massive impacts on the planet and population, not to mention religion, culture, law, society as a whole. But what if there was an empire on the planet that was larger and more advanced than all of the ones we just looked through? And not just more advanced by a little bit. So advanced that they were creating nuclear reactors well before Alexander was taking his first steps, or Plutarch was trying to complete a history of the Greeks. So advanced that we still don't totally understand what they were capable of. I'd certainly call that anomalous, wouldn't you? And that's not all. What if this empire also managed to stay hidden from modern science for centuries? They didn't stay alive, but their ruins have never been found by the scientific community. Their relics have been squirreled away from the eyes of the world over the decades. You'd never find a reference to the Mechanite Empire in a history textbook or in a museum, and that's for a very good reason. The SCP Foundation has spent an extremely large amount of time and money ensuring that the evidence of this ancient empire never comes out to the rest of the world. But even if a culture creates anomalies, is the culture itself anomalous? Does it need to be contained? Especially if they're all long dead and their technology has degraded into unusability. Well, maybe. Except their technology is doing just fine. 2,000 years and counting, their technology is still working perfectly. In some cases better than our modern devices. How can that be possible? How can that not be anomalous? Well, as unbelievable as it might seem, it's true. We'll dive more into what exactly this empire out of Greece was in a bit, but for now we're going to look at an SCP file associated with them. Except this one couldn't be picked up, stuffed in a box, and shipped off to a containment locker in Site-19. You'll see why in a minute. But for now, let's just take a look at the file. SCP-2406 lacks any images or flashy documentation, so no clues there. Unless it's not possible to photograph the anomaly for some reason. The object class is safe, and the containment procedures aren't very long. A site, Provisional Site-31, has been constructed around SCP-2406 and is under the cover of a Kazakhstani military base. Provisional sites are temporary sites that the Foundation puts up in the field to contain an anomaly that can't easily be transported somewhere else for containment. And if it's a Kazakhstani military facility, the anomaly is probably somewhere in Kazakhstan and can't be moved. Seems reasonable enough. All personnel who work directly with SCP-2406 are required to wear a Type A hazmat suit when in contact with the anomaly, and to undergo a full decontamination bath upon exiting. Whatever SCP-2406 is, being in direct contact with it can be dangerous to humans. So the Foundation uses specialized hazardous material suits, the big yellow jumpsuits you see near radiation or chemical spill sites. On top of that, an armed contingent of guards are to remain in place in and around Provisional Site-31 to ensure no one unauthorized accesses the anomaly. Though you'd have to wonder why anyone would try to access a military base. The containment procedures close out by declaring that anyone wanting to directly interact with SCP-2406-1, whatever it is, needs to get authorization from their site director. So, SCP-2406 has at least one sub-anomaly to deal with. Obviously, the Foundation is very interested in keeping this anomaly, or these anomalies, secret and protected at all costs, as well as limiting human exposure to something potentially dangerous. Now, let's take a look at the description. SCP-2406 is a mechanical automaton that's 93 meters tall and weighs approximately 210 metric tons. For the Americans among us, that's about 300 feet in height and 230 tons, over 450,000 pounds. No wonder the Foundation couldn't move it. After investigating, research concluded that SCP-2406 wasn't sentient, so it wasn't a robot or cyborg or artificial intelligence. An automaton is a machine to perform a specific task, and this thing, whatever it is, was controlled by at least 6 different operators, if not more. They piloted the machine using 160 different valves and levers within the torso, head, and chest of the automaton. And if it has a head and chest, it has limbs. Limbs that were controlled by a combination of pneumatics, hydraulics, and clockwork machinery. But controlling is one thing. How the heck does something like this get the power to move? The answer is a nuclear reactor embedded in its torso, with power cables running to its arms and legs. Yep, unbelievable as it may seem, this ancient curiosity was powered by the same source our modern aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines use. SCP-2406 was discovered on August 7, 1985, in the Aralkum Desert, but not by the Foundation. The Aralkum Desert used to be part of the Aral Sea before the Soviets drained part of it. It was during one of these drainings that the Russian military discovered SCP-2406 by tracking the radiation coming from it. As soon as they realized what they found wasn't some sort of abandoned warhead or uranium deposit, they called in the GRU's P Division, the unit of the Soviet government who dealt with anomalies, in the same way the Foundation did. They kept custody of the anomaly, but only for a few years. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, the Foundation stepped in with their agents and took control of the anomaly while everyone else in the area was busy dealing with the political fallout. They immediately began performing research and learned that the material SCP-2406 is made of isn't just one metal, but a toughened alloy of copper, zinc, nickel, lead, and iron. The mixture is why the metal looks bronze, despite not having any bronze in it. They also found 2 markings on it. One was on the outside of its back and showed the Aegean numeral for 9. Does that mean there are at least 8 more of these things buried somewhere? Maybe, but the Foundation hasn't found any of them. What's more interesting is that the numeral is Aegean, Greek, despite SCP-2406 lying in a lake in the Aral Sea, pretty far from Greece. The front of the anomaly, its chest, has an intricate symbol of a hammer striking an anvil on it. The right arm of the anomaly has a nozzle with piping attached to it. The piping leads to a pressurized chamber within SCP-2406 that is empty. But the Foundation did manage to find trace residue of various chemicals, such as pine resin, naphtha, quicklime, calcium phosphide, and sulfur inside the corners of the tank. Not coincidentally, those are the exact same chemicals used to create Greek fire, a primitive chemical weapon similar to napalm that the ancient Greeks used in warfare. Between this and the Aegean numeral, the Foundation judged that SCP-2406 was almost definitely constructed in Greece and brought here for some reason. The left arm of the anomaly isn't attached to it. In fact, initial reports said it was torn off at the shoulder and couldn't be found with the rest of it. But it seems that the Foundation managed to recover it since, detailed in one of the addenda in the file. Chemicals weren't the only thing they found inside SCP-2406. When they busted the main access plate open, researchers found something decidedly more morbid. 6 different human skeletons located inside its torso area were removed and cataloged before being carbon dated to 1100 BC, over 3,000 years old. And they were all wearing an extremely strange set of armor. While it looked Greek, it was made of a strange lead-copper alloy and filled with asbestos lining. Presumably, the armor was designed to absorb the radiation put out by SCP-2406's reactor. There were also tubes from the helmets leading to the outside, so they could breathe safe air. One of the levers pumped water into the tubes so that the pilots didn't die of thirst, and another tube was near the groin, probably so they could pee. Seems like the designers ensuring that whoever was piloting SCP-2406 could do so for hours or days. The Foundation ensured through testing that SCP-2406 doesn't work. The limbs don't move, and many of the levers have rusted or broken. All of that damage from disuse is repairable, but there is even more extensive damage from combat. The limbs and head were first discovered run through by long, sharp spikes made of an unknown substance. Though it feels like chitin, its molecular structure is closer to coral, and on top of that, it's biological and contains some elements of human DNA. Parts of its limbs are also crushed or indented with a segmented pattern, like a boa constrictor wrapping around its prey. The evidence suggests that SCP-2406 was in an intense fight with some sort of giant monster and lost. But that's all in the past. SCP-2406 also has a more present problem: its reactor. It melted through the back of the anomaly, penetrating the Earth, and seems to still be burning incredibly hot and radioactive nearly a kilometer under the surface. Engineers think that when it was intact, it works similarly to natural nuclear reactions rather than modern reactors, like when a uranium deposit begins to undergo fission. If nothing else, it means that SCP-2406's designers were studying those, and were far more advanced scientifically than any other culture on the face of the planet at the time that we know of. While they were investigating the wreck, Foundation personnel also discovered something interesting: a watertight ceramic jar, like the ones ancient Egyptians used to preserve organs. When they broke the seal, they found 2 tightly bound scrolls written in a unique language resembling Mycenaean Greek. It took 10 years of research for the Foundation's best linguists to translate the scrolls. What they found confirmed their theory. The scrolls were religious and written by a group called the Followers of Mechane, the ancient precursors to what we now call the infamous Church of the Broken God, an anomalous cult that seeks to rebuild their deity and make themselves more than human. The Foundations had run-ins with them in the past, but the documents indicate that 3,000 years ago, they weren't just a cult, they were an empire. The first scroll was translated to the following: "The Colossi were constructed in her schema. The Colossi were constructed to defend, secure, contain the enemy. Grand Karcist Ion, betrayer of man, destroyer of progress, sorcerer king of Aritum, a desolate domain of failed and fallen creation, built with the body's flesh of dead gods. Upon a throne of black ambition the enemy plots. The enemy is not a priest, they are a merchant, and they have sold the whole world totality. The Colossi were constructed in her schema. The Colossi were constructed to defend, secure, contain. The profane tools must be broken, uncreated. Drink deep the silver blood of Mechane. May her sacrifice not be in vain." Strange, but definitely religious. It seems to be a dedication to the broken god Mechane. The Colossi were created to fight their ancient enemy, the Sarkists. But the second document is much more interesting. "This is a testament of Matriarch Euprexia, legates faithful, servant of Mechane. I am not a warrior, but all warriors are dead, breaking themselves upon the enemy's host. The enemy has set their plan into motion. The Sorcerer King surrounds himself with corpses. To fight is to grow his legions. Egypt retreats from the world. The Hittites have fallen into chaos. The conspirators of Crete have sacrificed their own. The Aegean have fallen into barbarism. The city of 1,000 pillars is forever lost, has always been lost. Even the Deva grow desperate, with the enemy at their border. The center collapses, kingdoms crumble. The damage is done. The light of reason flickers and wanes. But Mechane sacrificed herself so that we might be free. We refuse to return to that darkness. We would rather die. But the siege at Euros was won. We must strike while the metal is hot, and thus we march for Kythera, at the end of all things. We have crossed the wine-dark sea. We have seen villages ravaged by the Red Death. We have seen the dead, the dying, and the deathless. We cast the accursed to holy flame. We enter his desolate domain, and in our left hand we carry our answer. We cannot undo what has been done, but we can delay the Sarkic dawn." So it seems that the ancient Mechanite Empire were once at war with another empire, the hated Sarkists. Losing and all their allies dying, they poured their resources into these massive mechs and sent them deep into enemy territory, equipped with some sort of doomsday weapon as a hope for success. What happens next is, unfortunately, a mystery. On December 12th of 1998, the Foundation found something almost 30 kilometers away from SCP-2406 during a routine patrol. At first, the researchers were confused. Had they found another wreck, one of the other 8 mentioned, or perhaps the body of the mysterious creature SCP-2406 had fallen in battle with? But after excavating it, they realized they had found something they hadn't even been looking for to begin with: SCP-2406's left arm. The way it landed suggested that it had been torn off during the battle and hurled away. But what monster could possibly throw something that heavy 30 entire kilometers? Either way, what the Foundation found attached to SCP-2406's arm is much more interesting. The researchers aren't sure what it is, but it's much different from the rest of SCP-2406. It seems to be some kind of weapon, but one that's not made of any metals on Earth, and with an incredibly anomalous design. The Foundation personnel, not sure of what to make of it, designated it SCP-2406-1. Its purpose is similarly unknown, and the consensus seems to be that whatever it is, it far exceeds human understanding. But what the Foundation is sure of is that it seems to bend reality near it, though they're not sure how because it doesn't seem to affect anything. The Foundation's best minds are stumped by it. All they can say for certain is that if it was ever repaired, powered up, and activated, it could do unprecedented damage to local reality. So interaction with it was highly regulated, and the Foundation put it away with the rest of SCP-2406. The fabric of reality itself ripples and bends as a metal craft unlike any other breaches Earth's atmosphere from the ground in less than a second. A nearly imperceptible thrust from engines beyond any known technology leaves an explosive fallout of dust and debris in its wake. All satellites and shuttles currently in orbit are surpassed by the emergence of the craft, which takes its place out beyond the stratosphere. Though no injuries or deaths are reported, the suddenness of this anomaly's appearance has left many powerful groups of interest scrambling to measure the extent of its capabilities. The SCP Foundation is at the forefront of this search for answers, dubbing both the craft and its impossible feat of faster-than-light speed as SCP-5392. Chief among the goals of the Foundation is maintaining normalcy in the known universe, and the apparent discovery of FTL is anything but normal. Before the countless other organizations with their own myriad of less than savory goals can get a hand on this breakthrough technology, the Foundation has a moral obligation to make contact with the driver, if any, of the so-called Tachyon Express. When it comes to interstellar threats, the Hemidal satellite is the SCP Foundation's first line of defense. Led by Deputy Director of Foundation Contingency Planning Operations General William Pendergast, Project Hemidal was instituted to research and deal with hostile aliens, or HEs. Its highly particular sensors are capable of picking up on any unusual activity within the Earth's atmosphere, and SCP-5392 certainly qualifies. In fact, a vessel of any origin that possesses the capabilities of faster-than-light travel is seen as above and beyond the baseline assumptions for HE activity. Any alien civilization that could harness such physics-defying technology from the get-go would likely not be an enemy that could be dealt with through Earth's current military means. As such, the Hemidal satellite's job in identifying and responding to SCP-5392 was effectively over the moment that it was clear that the ship came from Earth and was faster than light. Now the task of obtaining more information on the unidentified anomalous phenomenon fell to the rest of the Foundation, allowing the Hemidal to return to its previously planned surveillance. Site-26 soon became the control center for the operation to secure SCP-5392, with Site Director Nate Ferris leading the way and relaying information across the Foundation. Since faster-than-light technology was still very much beyond what any mobile task force could keep up with, no spacecraft were launched within the brief window of time that it took for Site-26 to gain visuals on the UAP. The initial look into the workings of SCP-5392 came from a source that was least expected. Instead of waiting for the results of satellite pictures or a video feed from a camera outside the atmosphere, the first footage of the unidentified anomalous phenomenon came from inside the craft itself. specifically in the form of a YouTube livestream created by the mysterious person of interest driving the Tachyon Express. Unfortunately, this window into the origins and intentions behind SCP-5392 came with a price, as whatever the Foundation could glean from the livestream, any number of internet users who came upon the stream by chance could also learn. The stream was discovered with 36 active viewers, which was ultimately manageable but represented the dangers of news on the UAP getting out there. The Foundation instructed its resourceful web hacking team to make the contents of the stream inaccessible to the rest of the internet, while also dispatching MTF Gamma 5, the Red Herrings, in order to track down and administer amnestics for all the viewers of the YouTube livestream. A different mobile task force dubbed the Village Idiots, due to their specialization in finding SCPs in urban environments, was sent to the site of SCP-5392's launch in order to assess the damage from the explosion. The content of the livestream itself was extremely telling, though several questions did remain. It was now unambiguous that the unidentified anomalous phenomenon of SCP-5392 was not the work of alien forces or any malicious entity, but rather the gritty manifestation of the passion of one human being, a man known as Albert Maple. For as long as humanity could gaze up at the stars, many have dreamed of a future where we as a species could live among them. Sometimes this desire came to us in the form of myths about heavens and fantastic extraterrestrial worlds, and other times in futurist dreams of colonizing the barren recesses of outer space. But for Albert Maple, these dreams were simply the precursor to the engineering problems he would fix in his lifetime. At over 60 years old, the brilliant mechanic would make the leap from working on terrestrial cars to constructing and launching his very own faster-than-light spacecraft. The Foundation was able to uncover Maple's identity and former occupation through the livestream, and designated him as POI 5392-1. Albert Maple did not leave much of a paper trail when he rocketed into outer space, but the mobile task force agents who arrived at the location he launched from, Othello, Washington, were able to gather more information about his reputation and history with the local neighborhood. Albert Maple was apparently a reclusive figure within the city, rarely sighted by his neighbors outside his own property. Despite this, Maple would eagerly provide his services as a car mechanic to anyone who asked, and he was reportedly very competent at his job and incredibly friendly in his demeanor. His expertise raises an obvious and yet unanswered question about SCP-5392's nature. Is the spacecraft non-anomalous or not? The Foundation would need to get in touch with POI 5392-1 directly to attempt to find out more, but either way, the response from the Foundation would have to be largely the same, with a few key distinctions. If the Tachyon Express itself was a non-anomalous vehicle built with entirely terrestrial and current-era technology, the instance of faster-than-light travel itself would be the object to which the designation of SCP-5392 refers to. On the other hand, if the Tachyon Express is inherently anomalous, and some function of its design allows it to function under FTL conditions consistently and without the interference of any other phenomenon, the spacecraft will be the object of SCP-5392. In either case, the Foundation will endeavor to contain both the Tachyon Express itself and POI 5392-1 as needed, and assign a formal object class that is appropriate to its containment difficulty. From the contents of Albert Maple's ongoing YouTube livestream, which were still able to be watched by select personnel within the Foundation, a number of interesting angles to approach a conversation with the man were noted. The Foundation made sure to embed a multitude of fake accounts in the stream chat, so as not to alert POI 5392 to any potential drop in viewership or the stream going private. While the personnel behind these chat accounts would provide a reasonable facsimile of a standard YouTube audience, asking questions through it would be met with mixed results. Maple didn't seem key to discuss the actual mechanics of his ship, instead rambling about the various faster-than-light technologies of classic sci-fi television, like Star Trek and Doctor Who. This didn't seem to be an intentional obfuscation on Albert Maple's part, but rather an authentic expression of the elderly man's timeless and oddly charming geekiness. Whatever drove him to take to the stars had obviously come from a place of endearment to futurist ideas, like those found in some of the softer, more hopeful sci-fi stories of the past. The other aspect of Albert Maple's psychology that seemed to come up repeatedly was the notion of employment at NASA. which the man seemed to view as a distant and lifelong dream. Ironically, if the engines of the Tachyon Express were all his design, the man would have achieved in his own 60 or so years more than several lifetimes worth of results in innovative space travel. But in any case, his desire to speak with and be recognized by NASA was an angle that the Foundation could use to get in Maple's good graces. Site Director Nate Ferris tapped the Site-26 communications analyst, a former police hostage negotiator named Santiago Macaulay, to pose as an agent of NASA and establish a voice call with POI 5392-1. This conversation would be the first between anyone on Earth and Maple since his launch, and was being treated as of paramount importance to the Foundation's future ability to contain this apparent break in the laws of reality. The Global Occult Coalition was already on the verge of muscling in on the situation, held back only loosely by what is referred to as the Dibs Clause in the Tau Treaty. The Dibs Clause states that the SCP Foundation calls dibs on any anomaly that it discovers first, leaving the rest of the groups of interest out there to wait their turn. But the GOC was never known for playing nice, and their go-to solution would have been transparently to shoot the Tachyon Express out of the sky, causing the inevitable death of Albert Maple. It was a callous and hasty plan of attack, but well within the Global Occult Coalition's reputation for zero-sum eradication of anomalies. Still, the Foundation relied on the GOC to placate the world governments while negotiations took place with POI 5392-1. There were certainly interested parties in the USA, China, Japan, and Russia who would have to be fed selective misinformation and delayed with whatever means were available. The phones at the Foundation were, without a doubt, ringing off the hook as every government contact around the globe tried to get a hold of any Foundation personnel willing to chat about the mysterious UAP. For the time being, all these incoming calls would be ignored. The GOC had their half of the bargain to uphold, and the SCP Foundation would see to it that they did. Meanwhile, McCrawley was wired into the communication systems aboard the Tachyon Express in an inconspicuous manner. Albert Maple would certainly believe that he was conversing with an associate from NASA, and the conversation would follow his tempo so as not to alert him to the possibility of espionage. There was, of course, no shortage of espionage involved, as the same hijacking team of Foundation technicians made futile attempts to hijack Maple's spacecraft from ground control. The computer for the YouTube livestream was not a successful route to the navigational functions of the Tachyon Express, and based on Maple's own words in the livestream, there was a sophisticated system of backups and redundancies on the ship that would make overtaking it through cyber warfare an extremely difficult task. Albert Maple's tone during the conversation with communications analyst Santiago McCrawley was pleasant, jovial even. He seemed delighted to be talking to a representative of NASA, grinning like a fanboy as he spoke the word Houston in reference to the NASA ground control he assumed he was talking to. Maple was rather candid about the construction of his spacecraft's interior, from detailing the amount of food and water rations that he had aboard as well as the setup for waste disposal. What Albert Maple intentionally did not mention was the secret behind his miraculous faster-than-light engine, though he did hint that more could be revealed if a job was secured for him with NASA. The SCP Foundation couldn't make any false promises in this regard, though Macaulay did his best to coax Maple into revealing more information. This was met with mixed results, as the excitable spirit of Albert Maple made him a bit of a scattershot conversationalist, and in terms of what the man planned to do with his genius piece of technology, the answer he gave was startling to the Foundation's ears. In short, Albert Maple wanted to link the blueprints of how the Tachyon Express managed to move faster than light with countless governments all over the world. Putting aside the bad outcomes of other groups of interest seizing the technology before the Foundation could, the total public release of SCP-5392 would make for a Herculean containment procedure. A global jump to light speed would literally accelerate arms and development to science fiction levels within weeks, if not days. Macaulay did his best to convince POI 5392-1 that his idea of sharing the Tachyon Express's secret would be a disastrous idea, but the man could not be dissuaded from his utopian vision. It seemed that more than the technology depicted in futuristic pieces of media such as Star Trek, Albert Maple was a true believer in the ideals that fictional organizations like Starfleet represented. He was adamant in saying that his faster-than-light blueprints would be the glue that would hold the entire human race together after so many thousands of years of infighting. His goal was a noble and altruistic one, but within the purview of the SCP Foundation's decades of experience with anomalies of all kinds, Albert Maple's ambition was seen as not only naive, but very dangerous. The communication was discontinued by POI 5392-1 soon after Macaulay asserted that giving FTL to the governments of Earth would result in lightspeed bombs. It was a disheartening development, as now the prospect of catching up to SCP-5392 would be the only way forward. Reason, or at least the Foundation's version of it, clearly eluded Maple, but so would his Tachyon Express as long as it could still travel with greater velocity than any other vessel in the known universe. As Site-26 contemplated its next move, the GOC reached out to make its tetchiness about the whole SCP-5392 situation readily known. It was like their finger was on a big red button that simply read, "Destroy it," though again, this was typical. What wasn't typical was the almost uncharacteristic display of restraint on the GOC's part in their inquiry towards the Foundation. While their method of a simple execution was still suggested as a pragmatic alternative, a representative of the GOC, Victor Eckelberg, asked via email whether or not the SCP Foundation would spare any anomalous assets to retrieve the craft. Though no terrestrial and non-anomalous ship could hope to outpace SCP-5392, the use of anomalies could theoretically approach the problem in a non-linear way. After all, there were countless space-altering SCPs, and others that could directly incapacitate or persuade Albert Maple. It was a call to fight fire with fire, so to speak. This suggestion was quickly shut down by the Foundation's head of public outreach, Catherine Long, who informed Eckelberg in her reply of the notorious unreliability of most anomalies in the Foundation's jurisdiction. Many of the more powerful ones that could apply to the situation were uncooperative, and an attempt to send them on a retrieval mission to space could result in a major containment breach. Having to retrieve additional anomalies, especially ones that would have otherwise been reasonably well contained, was an outcome that had to be avoided. Thus, all other anomalous means of pursuit into the Tachyon Express were taken off the table. While tensions still brewed between the GOC and the SCP Foundation, it was clear, at least for now, that the Tau Treaty and its all-important Dibs Clause would be honored in this case. The same could not be said of whatever groups of interest or government body got involved next in the ongoing mission to apprehend SCP-5392. The events that would follow were still very much in flux, and no doubt would contain many power plays and close calls. For now, Albert Maple and his Tachyon Express sailed through the starlight, hurtling towards an increasingly uncertain but hopefully beautiful and positive future.
Joe sighed to himself quietly, looking out of the window at the still, silent stretch of highway snaking through the desert, only to disappear somewhere over the horizon. The sun was slowly crawling down, almost completely vanished from sight, and he knew when it was gone, there'd be no light left in the desert. It wasn't the same kind of darkness you found in a city. There they had streetlights and cars whizzing through with their headlights on full blast. It never really got dark in the cities, but out here, nothing but true pitch-black darkness for miles around, only alleviated when the sky was clear enough for the stars to shine through, or broken by the beams of a passing car speeding down the highway. Giving another sigh, Joe sipped on his coffee. By this point, it was lukewarm to match the dropping temperature outside and bitter to the taste. But he needed the caffeine to keep himself awake. After all, he had a long night ahead of him, but then again, they were all long nights in this line of work. This was the only diner for miles around, and he had no idea just how many hours it would be before he next got to eat or drink anything. With an almost empty pot with the last dregs of coffee in one hand, the waitress came up to Joe at his table. It was the last spot in the diner with anyone still sitting in it. "Closing time," she told him with a tired smile. "One for the road?" Nodding, Joe lifted his travel mug for her to fill. As her workday was ending, his was about to start. He grabbed his jacket and slung it over his shoulder, leaving a few dollars as a tip on the table before he made his way out of the diner and over to his car. Buckling into the driver's seat, Joe took a deep breath as he pulled his phone out of his pocket, dreading the potential barrage of notifications that would come flooding through the second he did. Opening up the corresponding app, he clocked in for the night, and sure enough, was instantly met with a veritable tidal wave of requests. Grumbling quietly to himself, he tapped accept on the first one he saw and turned the key in the ignition. Working as a driver for a carpool and ride-sharing service was far from a simple job at the best of times. but even more so in this particular area of the southwestern United States. The state of New Mexico shared a border not only with Texas, but with Chihuahua, one of the northernmost states of Mexico. Being so close to the border meant that most of the calls and requests for lifts that Joe received on an average night meant he needed to bounce back and forth between the US and Mexico, crossing the border at his client's request. Legally, of course. We're not going all Breaking Bad here today. Some nights weren't so complicated. Someone might just need a quick ride from Dona Ana to the town of Truth or Consequences, a New Mexico town named after, we kid you not, a TV game show. Sure, that might have been a 75-mile drive up the I-25, but at least it didn't involve crossing from El Paso into the city of Juarez. At this time of night, it was nowhere near as busy as during the day, but even so, that didn't make hopping back and forth over the border and all the red tape it entailed any less of an arduous process, especially stuck behind the wheel of a car for hours on end. Tonight, however, wasn't a simple night. Joe's first call was for a pickup from a couple whose flight had been rerouted to the international airport in Juarez. They seemed to be newlyweds and demanded to be taken all the way back to a hotel in Las Cruces, making it abundantly clear that they didn't want to stay closer to the airport and outright refusing when Joe offered to recommend them some nearby hotels. Getting to know most of the area around the three-way intersection between New Mexico, Texas, and the Mexican border after driving around it so many times, he'd gotten to know the area pretty well. Unfortunately, not everyone wanted to hear a display of Joe's local knowledge. Most of them just wanted him to drive them in silence. Next up, a group of rowdy guys, real frat house types from the University of El Paso, Texas. They wanted to be taken to a bar halfway across the city. A bit more of a straightforward trip, Joe thought, although he could have done without them drunkenly chanting spring break at the top of their lungs every 5 minutes. After that, it was another jaunt across the border, this time transporting a suit and Stetson-wearing Texas gentleman to Horizon City. He spent the whole ride on his phone, talking at length about a business deal he'd just closed, not saying a word to Joe the entire time. Doug Dimmadome, eat your heart out. The next person to request a lift wasn't much more talkative either. She was a 20-something girl who plainly stated she just wanted to get far away from Sierra Blanca. Hours and hours had ticked by since Joe had left the diner. The last of the coffee in his travel mug had been finished long before. His next ride request had come through and required him to once again make the drive out to the other side of the border. By this point, the evening had turned into night and was now approaching the earliest hours of the following morning. The desert still filled with nothing but deep, inky blackness. The same desert that had scorched acres upon acres of skin, that had taken so many lives, big and small, and had picked the skin and flesh from countless bones. The desert can be a truly merciless place at the best of times, but sometimes there's a little something more out there, just waiting for you, dark and hungry. Occasionally, as he drove back towards El Paso, Joe would see another car speeding towards him on the other side of the highway, but it was so dark that he could see nothing of the driver. Only their headlights were visible, right up until they drove past him. Everything behind the hood of the oncoming car almost imperceptible as it whizzed through the night. Crossing the border so many times a night, Joe had become friendly with a few of the officers that patrolled the gates, waving cars past after they'd shown the necessary paperwork. He was never usually held there for long enough to start actual conversations with them, exchanging only a friendly nod or one-liner with the few Border Patrol guards whose names he could still remember. But sometimes when things were a little quieter at the gates, he'd overhear the odd passing comment while his driver's side window was rolled down. Tonight, as the long barrier in front of his car was raised, Joe caught a few words coming through on a radio belonging to one of the guards, something vague about sightings of phantom lights. He chuckled to himself, writing it off as yet another alleged alien sighting. Something about the desert at night really seemed to capture people's imaginations, Joe thought to himself, as he pulled away from the border gate, heading for the I-10. There were always stories like that circulating around this area of New Mexico. It was easy to see why, being so close to Roswell, New Mexico, the home of alien sightings, and just a couple hundred miles away from the true alien mecca, Area 51, a United States Air Force base that secretly housed alien life forms and spaceships, allegedly at least, if years of conspiracy believers and Facebook memers are to be believed. Every so often, one of Joe's passengers would ask him about unidentified flying objects,
or he'd overhear them talking amongst themselves about a slew of urban legends. Phantom hitchhikers that would hitch rides on the highway, only to vanish from the back seats of cars. And of course, tales of disembodied floating lights, either hovering way up in the sky or just above the ground. Regardless of whichever one was popular at any given moment, Joe knew there were plenty of weird and spooky stories coming out of the desert. What he was unaware of, however, was that he was currently in one of his own. He'd been so wrapped up in thoughts of what he might do if one of the people that hired him turned out to be a wandering spirit that Joe didn't even notice he had made a wrong turn. It was only by the virtue of glancing at his car's GPS that he even realized, and by then, it had been long enough since that he was completely unsure how far back it was that he had made such an error. According to the map, he was nowhere. He hadn't stopped. His car was still moving at a steady speed down the long stretch of asphalt, but the GPS didn't show any road at his current location. He had no clue which part of which highway he was even on. Short on options and short on time to get to his next client for the night, Joe just did what his job required of him. He kept on driving. Anyone watching from a distance would have seen an empty, lengthy portion of highway with but one single car traveling along it, only the headlights both illuminating the road in front of it and giving away the car's position. Slowing down slightly just to play it safe, Joe tried searching up where he was using the Maps app on his phone. He figured he wouldn't get stopped for checking his phone while driving, or be much risk to any other drivers on the road. After all, it seemed like his was the only car around for miles. Even if he was still heading in near enough the right direction for his next pickup, that would be at least some saving grace. Maybe the map on the car's built-in GPS was a little outdated, he thought, and that was preventing this part of the highway from showing up. Connection to the internet was extremely limited this far out in the New Mexico desert, and by the time the map loaded, it didn't provide much in the way of new information or even the slightest bit of comforting reassurance. It only seemed to agree with the GPS that Joe was well and truly lost. As he took his free hand off the wheel for a split second, just to try and zoom in on the satellite view of the terrain, two bright white lights appeared in the distance. Startled, Joe dropped his phone into the front passenger seat, hearing it slip onto the floor of the car as he gripped the steering wheel again, both hands back to 10 and 2. The lights were speeding in the opposite direction he was driving in, a fair few feet ahead of him, but still, it was another vehicle on this otherwise empty, isolated stretch of the highway. A loud and sudden idea rang out in Joe's head. If he could signal what he had assumed to be another approaching car, he could ask the driver where exactly he was and what the quickest route to get back to the I-10 was. He couldn't guarantee he would make the oncoming vehicle stop and help him after all. So few people would willingly trust a stranger on the highway, but considering his only other options were to either keep driving along this seemingly endless road or to turn back around and try to find wherever it was he'd made the wrong turn in the first place, needless to say, Joe's hands were a little tied. Tapping the appropriate switch affixed to his wheel, he flicked on his own headlights on and off in an effort to catch the other driver's attention. Nothing. The pair of headlights kept their current course, both theirs and Joe's traveling parallel to each other, as if they were about to joust with their beams of light. Hitting the switch again, Joe tried lowering his headlight setting and then raising them back to full brightness. Still nothing from the other driver. He pushed the emergency button that activated both the front and rear lights of the car, but this one only yielded the same result. Deciding there was nothing else that he could do, Joe gently pulled his vehicle over, parking abruptly at this side of the highway. He instinctively checked his rear view, only to remember that there wasn't anyone behind him, just him and the apparently oblivious driver approaching ahead. In a last-ditch effort to get their attention, Joe punched the car horn, rolling down his window in order to listen for a response. The blaring noise echoed through the empty desert night, a loud and sustained blast followed by a beat of silence as Joe paused, waiting to hear the same sound back from the oncoming vehicle. He squinted at it through the dark. It was still pretty far, but closing rapidly, or as far as he could tell it was. All he had to go on was the advancing lights, with nothing visible behind them. Joe leaned out of his window, hoping that it would somehow give him better visibility through the sheer darkness of a desert at night. It did as little to improve things as a second, much longer blast of his horn did. The other driver still didn't react. By now, the lights were close enough that whoever was behind the other wheel would be able to see Joe. And yet, they didn't do anything to change their speed, didn't flicker their lights back or sound their own horn. Nothing. Just the same 2 points of light.
They might as well have been floating just above the ground, given how they obscured what was behind them. At this point, Joe was certain they were close enough to see him now, little more than a few feet in front of his stationary car and still closing at a sustained speed. Getting agitated, he went to hit his horn a third time when he noticed something, or rather, he noticed something that he hadn't. This car hurtling towards him through the night wasn't making any sound. It wasn't just that the other driver deliberately hadn't returned the signals Joe had been trying to give. There was no noise coming from it whatsoever. No grumbling of an engine, nor the rolling of rubber tires against the asphalt surface of the highway. It was silent, just the pair of ominous lights soundlessly racing through the night, heading straight for where Joe was sat, parked still, a sitting duck like he was defenseless prey. Violently turning the key in the ignition, Joe slammed his foot down on the accelerator. His car sputtered to life and careened down the road. He was headed straight for the other car, if it even was a car, hoping to shoot straight past it and take his chances continuing along the highway alone. The lights were almost on top of him now, still too bright to make out anything behind them, but there was still no engine noise, nothing to indicate what the hell it even was, until one of them jumped onto the hood of his car. An orb of light, attached to a thrashing shape beneath, parted from the other. It leaped through the air and came down right in the path of Joe's car, just as he was about to pass what he first thought to be another car. The light smashed directly through the windshield, Joe instinctively lifting an arm to cover his face and protect his eyes from the impending shower of broken glass. But it was in that second that he took his eyes off the road that the other light made its move. It had been perfectly parallel with Joe's car, only to turn sharply and violently, connecting with the driver's side door with enough force to not only dent the metal surface, but to completely lift the car up. It barreled sideways, tumbling over itself off the highway and into the surrounding desert. Trapped inside, buckled tight, Joe was thrown about in his seat, unable to steady himself as the car rolled. His arm was still over his face, splinters of glass showering over him. The whatever it was still thrashing about, its glow illuminating the entire interior of the car, until the whole vehicle came to a stop, landing upside down, wheels in the air pointing up at the cloudy night sky. Hanging the wrong way up, Joe reached for his seatbelt and unclasped it. His head instantly dropped onto the ceiling of the upturned car. Through the shattered driver's side window, he crawled out on his hands. The pain was shooting through his whole body, bruises and blood covering his arms, an intense, agonizing feeling of broken bones on top of that. Rolling over onto his back, Joe looked up at the wreck of his car, his livelihood, and the monster standing in front of it. Illuminated fully for the first time by the car's still active headlights, the thing had managed to pull itself free from the destroyed windshield and was now pacing slowly around the overturned hood. It walked on two legs, but it didn't move like a man. In fact, it didn't even look like one. It was like something pulled straight out of prehistoric times, a pair of hinged limbs supporting a streamlined reptilian body with hooked claws on its feet. Its back was arched, keeping itself low as its two arms stayed close to its center. The creature had almost human-like hands, but each finger was tipped with long, pointed talons. But its head was what Joe saw first, what he had seen at a distance and mistaken for car headlights only a few minutes ago. In the place he wouldn't have expected to see a pair of slitted eyes staring at him was a bulbous mass of a head. Bioluminescent light glowed from beneath the monster's skin, a brain visible amongst a web of bright organs, and beneath that, a wide, gaping maw of sharp teeth. Joe noticed another light drawing near, brightening the area where he lay defenseless. The second of the raptor-like monsters was pacing closer to him, both their glowing heads kept low to the ground, ready to strike.
"Yep, looks pretty clear to me," one of the men disguised as a highway patrol officer announced. "Handprints match up with what their front paws look like. No trace of the driver. Just a big wreck in the middle of nowhere." "Better get on the horn to control then," his colleague replied, wearing a similar uniform. "I thought SCP-745s were only found a little north of here." "We shut off the section of the highway they usually show up at," the First Foundation agent explained casually, sipping his coffee as he looked at the upturned wreckage of Joe's car. His body was nowhere to be found. "But every now and then, a couple of them will show up a bit away from there. One of them wouldn't come this far into the south of New Mexico on its own, though." Because of the lights, right?" his fellow agent responded, the two of them walking back towards the car. "They're heads. They mimic car headlights or something." "Well, there's that." The first man nodded, taking one last look at the long, open desert around them and the highway stretching through it.
Plus, it must get lonely traveling out here on your own. Now go and check out SCP-1265, the Mesozoic Preserve, and SCP-682, Terrifying Test Logs, to continue on a Jurassic journey filled with more rampaging reptilian creatures and other ravenous raptor-like anomalies.